Good morning and welcome once again to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and joining me today is my colleague, Connor Exum of Leon Trotsky's Revolutionary Podcast and Newsletter. How was your week, Connor? I know there's been a lot of stuff in the news again.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. It's been a busy week. I've been really big into everything from AI to Lamborghini's 4-day work week.
The Lamborghini's 4-day work week is a big deal, I have to admit, and I would like to know why that union campaign wasn't publicized more.
I would too. I'm also trying to get in contact with some people from the campaign in Italy and find out what they did that was so successful.
They love every contract negotiation, but the ones the union wins.
Yeah, it's always you're so close. You were just
they're fighting so hard at Starbucks and Amazon, and I'm not trying to put down the people fighting so hard at Starbucks and Amazon. I have a great deal of respect for them, but at the same time, they love the union campaigns that aren't winning rights for workers. They loved the SAG-AFTRA strike, but the deal that was finally made was just a little too good for the AI and not quite as good for the workers as it could have been. And can I say, just as simply from observing Twitter, it appears like there's some sort of weakness to the SAG-AFTRA negotiating process anyway. Because every time SAG-AFTRA signs a new union contract, Ellen Barkin tweets that she lost her health care again.
Yeah, I noticed that. I can't understand that myself. I mean, I can't decide whether that's just some cruel joke she's just playing on the world, or if it's the actual reality is that they can't maintain a health care program within that union block.
Now, and I mention this because, we're in an election year. We're going to hear Democrats running for office say once again, we've got to have those strong unions that protect our health care.
Well, I don't know if we're going to have that. I mean, we're already seeing AOC is trying to say that the DSA and the Justice Democrats weren't that important in her victory. So maybe they're moving away from that. Maybe they don't feel the country is that left anymore, and they're gonna be like, it's just good enough,
And we may see that too. At the same time, if she really goes that way, then there goes everything she promised her constituents.
It's true. I mean, I thought that was amusing when I read that article yesterday afternoon.
I'm not a big fan of the DSA as an organization. I believe it is too institutional and too mired in possible reform, as opposed to repeatedly and loudly stating the demands of the proletariat.
Oh, I agree.
With that in mind, I will say that DSA was important enough to Jamal Bowman's victory that despite having originally run as a pro-Israel candidate, and despite his allies in DSA preventing him from being censured or ejected, he has after actually visiting Israel, Jamal Bowman now seems to get it.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that his voting has been perfect. Everybody's been sadly voting present or yes on some of the most terrible resolutions in the House.
Well, that's because they're too afraid to.
But with that in mind, he's still saying this is apartheid. And his tune has totally changed since he was elected. He's responded the way that the people who were trying to get him censured in DSA would have wanted him to respond in the first place.
Yeah.
And someone deserves credit for that, I've got to say. And I mean, I hate to talk good about Democrats in office, but I mean, Bowman deserves credit for that. I have to admit, I
He
don't
does
like
deserve credit for at least for at least not, keeping the status quo dialogue.
basically completely reversing his rhetoric on the topic.
And that's important. I mean, that at least shows that you can have pressure, even if it's as weak as DSA's pressure. There's something to it. So it just surprised me when AOC came out and started to say to everyone, well, really wasn't that important. It was all me. When you start hearing a politician say it's all me, it is definitely time to start checking for a new one, I think, because that's somebody who has definitely become totally focused on what's best for themselves and not their constituency.
I have to agree. And I mean, there's always been signs up to and including rumors that have apparently been confirmed since that she interned for Teddy Kennedy.
Oh yeah, she interned for Teddy Kennedy. She had a huge. She started her career off out of college as trying to become an entrepreneurial bookseller.
Well, what's really interesting about her college career is her major was international relations
and economics
at
Boston University
College.
That's it, the other one, college.
Now, when you go to an Ivy or Ivy adjacent or public Ivy level school and study international relations, it is generally assumed by many people in certain elements of the informal media that watches such things that you might be looking to get a job with CIA.
It's definitely a possibility, or you're looking for a job in some governmental group from State Department all the way down to the CIA.
But generally speaking, and I this wasn't actually his major, so this is just a joke. But generally speaking, international relations majors look a lot like Mayor Pete.
Yes, they do. They go to Mackenzie, and from Mackenzie they go to the CIA, and from the CIA they go to the State Department.
That's the whole thing. Is that they go to CIA first and then go from CIA to McKinsey, but it looks like they've been working for McKinsey the whole time. It's really complicated, and the way one hand washes the other and it all interacts is fascinating. Because unless they've changed it, generally speaking, they want to recruit people in college.
Yes.
Because college people generally feel passionately about the ideas that they consider important. And so you want to get people while they're in college, you train them while they're in college, you finish their training while they get their degree, and then their first job somewhere, wherever it is the horrible, overused spy fiction term, NOC, non-official cover.
That's right. I had a professor who, in political science, that was one of my minors, and he wanted to get me into the CIA. It's like, no thanks. He was a big Russian expert.
Well, of course he was.
he worked. He was in the Stanford. He was in the Hoover Institute.
It's sad. It's like, he probably came within a few published papers of being the next Zbigniew Brzezinski or dude who just died. Unfortunately, I'm already forgetting his name. Kissinger.
I don't know if he was that big.
We forget. Kissinger dies, and I already forget his name.
I don't know what it was, but he said to me, after taking like 6 courses with him, he's like, if you ever want to get a job, in the State Department or something like that, I can help you. I was like, do you mean the CIA? He said, that's one possibility. I was like, no thanks.
Now you see, we do need people willing to infiltrate. But that's a seriously difficult job that people have to prepare themselves for.
I don't know. I mean, they're hard to infiltrate.
That's not what Aldrich James says.
I know, but I'm just saying that the only difference between him is that, I mean, it's probably easier to be a double agent like that because they're probably not looking that hard for those, but they're always looking hard for the guy who's going to like rat them out.
That's the funny joke. If you watch the Netflix documentary, people were trying to catch Ames for like 10, 15 years, and nobody was listening to them before we get started on Palestine and AI and go from there, I do want to mention that the CIA once took nothing more seriously than Russian spies.
That's right, 1950.
And they took Russian spies so seriously that some CIA historians argue that the focus on counterintelligence and catching Russian spies became an obsession with the agency that ground all other meaningful Cold War projects to a halt by the 1970s and 1980s. So with this in mind, you have to understand that by the time the 90s were, it was in this climate. It was in this climate of counterintelligence is getting to be the tail that wags the dog. We're not doing anything because of all of these accusations that people are spies. It was in this climate that the CIA started just totally blowing off accusations against people like Aldrich James because they had been burned so many times investigating this stuff. And it turns out the guy is just garden variety super patriot who's doing some illegal stuff on the side, like all the others, and isn't actually a Russian spy. And they're like, we've been burned by this. We can't go investigating every possible Russian spy. And this one actually is. Oops.
Well, yeah, but I think that it'd be hard to be a leftist spy there. They're more interested in looking at that, like the internal leftist, the guy that's really going to do them damage. The spy case, they could just say, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. That's the way sometimes you're going to have this problem.
Hey, how do you know that the guy who was falsely accused of being a spy for China wasn't really a spy for his local Communist Party?
That's right.
And they spin it all to China because they want to blame the foreign government.
They did that in the 50s for sure.
Yes. Well, they prosecuted people left and right for being communist spies for running for office with the Socialist Party of America for a little while.
Oh yeah. Well, that was the big thing, right? That's how they destroyed the whole labor union, that and the Taft-Hartley Act. I mean, they had labor unions, infiltrated more so than anybody else in the world at one point.
Which is depressing, too, because the American labor movement was a nice hotbed of communism in the 20s and 30s.
It was, and that's why it had to go.
Yes, I know. That's what's depressing.
I mean, it was successful, too.
It was like, so the whole big thing, and, people don't really think about this at all anymore, but the whole big thing in the 1920s was a fight for control of the organized union movement between communists and anarchists.
That's right.
And the reason that people like Walter Ruther were so well positioned in World War II and post World War II unions was because the anarcho-syndicalists had won. With, sadly, the help of the Red Scare, a lot of the anarchists were turning in communists in order to win, and that ended up helping de-radicalize the union in the long run too.
Yeah, that was. But then you have the whole shift in the 50s, right? Even Ruther made a big shift, right? I mean,
yeah, but I mean, they still assassinated Ruther though, so I mean.
It never been proven. Although it's kind of odd that all
they've never proven lots of things, but that doesn't mean we don't know that someone in CIA shot JFK.
It's kind of funny that all of his gauges on his plane that day went out. Like every one of them.
Well, but what's really hilarious, and this is something that gets overlooked, is that Ruther put a lot of UAW money into Black activism in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
The UAW was one of the major sponsoring groups that put up the money for the March for Jobs and Freedom. And there was a trend among there was a certain segment of the labor market who had been badly off before World War II and was better off after World War II, who would say things to little kids like, yeah, you see that guy? That's Walter Ruther. He's the white Martin Luther King Jr. And you can't have people saying something like that about someone in the 1960s.
No, you can't.
So, I mean, Ruther was imperfect and did a lot of things I don't agree with, but at the same time, you can't deny that he was assassinated. It's just too convenient.
Well, I would just say that, I mean, he did eventually get turned over to the idea that we needed to produce more. That was the big 1950s
there was
union
always
shift.
a belief. So, even Karl Marx talks about unleashing the productive forces.
I know.
And while certain corners of the quote unquote Marxist internet lay into that way too hard, it is one of the even CLR James, who was the intellectual grassroots thinking for what became autonomian Marxism and libertarian Marxism, and what some people what you could inaccurately, if you wish, but hilariously call anarcho-Trotskyism. But with all that in, even CLR James could not give up the idea that, we're going to need Taylorism for a little while longer.
Oh, yeah. But what I was just getting at is that was the big thing right? I mean, why Lamborghini is such a big thing is that their unions haven't given up on the shorter work week.
Yep.
Our unions just said, nope, you don't need that. What you really need is to work 8 hours a day and get like 900 times more stuff. And then you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they're
well, that's a big part of the problem with the aggressive language and small results of the liberal labor movement lately.
Yeah.
But this is a good time to cut into the fact that a couple of weeks ago, a major magazine was busted because not only were clickbait articles apparently being written by AI, but the AI had generated fake pictures and fake biographies for the writers of these clickbait articles. And a tech site that discovered this and started asking questions reported that not long after they started asking questions, all the pictures and writer bios were wiped from the site, along with all of the clickbait content that they had written.
And that's not really the first time. Wasn't it USNet? Was like 2 years ago?
So BuzzFeed was openly saying that they were having AIs write a lot of their stuff, and they closed their newsroom and fired all their human writers. Mm-hmm. So that said, BuzzFeed said they were doing that.
Oh, I know.
BuzzFeed didn't make a secret of what was happening. And also, let's face it, BuzzFeed is BuzzFeed.
Yeah, I mean,
Sports Illustrated has a reputation of being a quote-unquote serious journalistic outlet as far as such things go in sports.
Apparently. Well, I wasn't disagreeing, but I was just saying that this whole trend had been,
Oh, absolutely.
Moving towards it.
But when Sports Illustrated gets caught, red-handed, and this is somebody who has the highest standards in their industry. You're what you're supposed to believe. Shamelessly racing to the bottom.
What you got to question, though, is the other thing about it, because of the inherent problems with AI creating up its own facts, creating up, misinformation, putting together all little pieces of plagiarized articles all together.
Yes, you were telling me before we went on the camera that a lawyer was nearly disbarred because the AI he was using to write briefs created false cases for him.
That's right. I mean, so you have to really wonder, can you trust the facts in these clickbait articles?
Well, what I will say is this. They've been using AI accurately enough in calling shots for the IDF in Palestine that they've managed to kill more than 12,000 people. So apparently AI does some things accurately, even if it does lead you to shoot a lot of hospitals and private homes and schools and churches and mosques.
Well, that's a little bit more of its wheelhouse, statistically looking at where concentrations of large groups of people are, and then saying, oh, maybe this is where terrorists are because there's a lot of people there. You're probably going to have a higher probability.
But I mean, so this means, though, does this mean that the CIA intelligence analyst whose job is to say these are the places you should blow up is the next job to be lost to automation?
Might be, but I don't know.
It'd be interesting if you actually start crushing the so-called elite backbone of your security services to replace them with AI.
Well, that would be an interesting turn of events. I mean, it's hard to figure out where you'd go from there, right? I mean, how do you check it? How do you make sure that it's giving you the right answers, right?
Well, at least when you're calling shots for drones and artillery and airstrikes, you know whether people are dying or not. I guess.
You know where people are dying, but do you know if the right ones are dying? I mean, it's
so
kind of like
you have to. So let me explain the IDF's philosophy about the quote right people dying unquote. So you have to understand the code that goes into words like infrastructure. They say we want to destroy the entire infrastructure of Hamas. All right. So you have to understand that when and one of their guys, several of their people have been quoted inconveniently saying this, so I'm not just talking out my ass. When they talk about infrastructure, you have to understand that part of their vision of infrastructure is that children grow up and eventually kill Israeli soldiers. And that women have babies who become children who eventually grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're talking about destroying infrastructure, they're talking about killing women and children. They're just not saying it explicitly.
Sure, that's understandable. I mean,
so when you talk about the quote right people, and you go back to the statement, well, every accusation the settler movement makes is some kind of a confession. When they say that every dead Palestinian is a victory for Hamas, what they mean is every dead Palestinian is a victory for the IDF.
What I was going to say is that you really don't need AI if that's your goal, right? I mean, you really don't need anyone. You don't picking out the targets. You just get a map and you put a little red square around that, and you tell your commanding officers, I want this blown off the face of the earth.
But if you have real-time data that says this is where the women and children are, it's a lot more effective than just randomly doing it.
Well, sure. I mean, it just takes a little longer.
This is the part that I think is really important. It's not just that the IDF bombs schools or bombs churches or bombs mosques or bombs hospitals or bombs private family homes, all of which are bad. It's also that the IDF programs a computer to say, this is the best time to bomb this school or this hospital or this church.
True. But what I was just getting at is that, you can just do this, without even using AI.
Hey, you do it the old-fashioned way, like in Clear and Present Danger, where they send the light infantry guys into Colombia to hold the infrared gizmo at the target on the ground, so that the bomber in the air can fire off a smart bomb that follows that laser targeting system that they're holding on the target and blows up the drug refinery. Now, that's the way they used to do it. But the whole point of Clear and Present Danger is that somebody burns the operation and leaves those guys behind. Mm-hmm. You can't leave AI behind that way. And so that's very appealing if you're thinking of this perfect, clean world where none of your guys ever die and the other people's guys die all the time.
Well, I won't deny that, but I'm just saying that, to me, it doesn't really seem like AI is that big of an advantage if your goal is just, picking out a city and leveling it.
So, I mean, let's be honest.
We did that in World War II.
The last time we talked about AI, isn't one of the things we basically agreed on is AI really actually ever an advantage? Or is it all just a snow job?
I think it's a snow job.
I mean, I think there's a lot of snow job involved. It's fairly clear to see that, algorithm-based AI advertising has ruined Google as the product it once was, even as ignoring a very basic motto like "Don't be evil" has destroyed Google as the institution that it once was.
I never believed they were ever not going to fall. Once you get big enough.
At some point, money matters more than a motto like that.
That's just something you put there so that you sound nice to all of the 20-somethings. The 20-somethings you want to bring out of college.
Well, and that was really the thing. It was a recruiting ad. The problem is that enough Google employees have believed it that they keep facing mutinies over all these evil projects they want.
And yet they still keep doing all the evil projects.
Some of them, yes, and others get canceled. Firefly has been dead for a while now. I don't know if they revived it under a new name yet or not. That was the project that they were undertaking for the Chinese government that, if successful, would have been copied by the U.S. government immediately.
Who says it hasn't?
I'm sure it has, but then that goes to the whole other argument entirely.
You wouldn't know if Firefly were actually operating. That's the problem. if it works right. I mean, if it doesn't work right, then you know, right? Because you can't go to your website. Your emails are all broken.
This is why you keep. Well, hey, denial of service attacks. Firefly's having a bad day.
That's right. What I was getting at with AI is that I just don't see any real advantage in this, right? I mean, if your plan is to just level a whole city anyway, right? What does it really matter whether you knew the school had 50,000 people or 5? If you just attack that day and you level 10 square miles of city a day, you're going to get everybody.
I think it really depends on what you perceive an advantage to be. So if you believe that the advantage to AI is that you believe a bunch of Michael Crichton bullshit about how we need computers because people are fallible, but the problem with computers is they're programmed by fallible people, but we still need computers because they're the only thing that can save us from fallible people, then you're just sort of stuck in this unverifiable loop where you're sort of repeating the same stuff over and over again as an aphorism without ever really looking at the data of what you're actually saying. Now, that's on one hand. Then these are people who have lost sight of any utility. But then there's the other. If your reason for using AI is because it's just easier if it's automated, then that's a huge advantage right there. It's automated.
That's probably the biggest part is what I'm getting at, is that the only real reason to use it is that it takes the human factor out of selecting the targets, so no one feels guilty about bombing 10,000 kids in a day. You just say, well, the AI told me to go there, and I just pressed the button on my console, on my targeting console that said release bombs. Speaking
as a MASH fan, I have to say that one of the best episodes is the one where they show the bomber pilot who thinks it's a nice, easy war, and he doesn't have anything to be stressed about what happens after he drops his bomb on a village in South Korea.
Yeah, but that's what I'm talking about. That kind of thing.
They want to get rid of that.
Yeah, because remember, back in 1983, they had a huge problem with the Air Force actually not delivering their ordnance on targets in Lebanon. It was like the first time ever. that the Air Force basically mutinied, and they were dropping it in the Mediterranean Sea. They were hitting other areas that were
because they didn't want to bomb civilian Beirut for no reason.
Right. So this AI takes that all out of the question, right?
That's true.
So that's the only thing I see, because, you know, figuring out the targets, it may or may not even be accurate. Doesn't really matter unless the whole target is the city, and then you just have to give people the excuse to be able to bomb that city without having any issue.
And if you're running the program in such a way where it's just doing very basic computer algorithm stuff like monitoring traffic cams and radio broadcasts and internet traffic or what have you to tell you where people are so you can just maximize casualties. Well, that's something that AI can probably do really accurately, because you're just using it for things that people use it for with reasonable accuracy already.
Sure.
Now, I think it would be funny if AI just started making up imaginary targets in Gaza, and we find out that all of a sudden the bombs are falling in the Red Sea instead of on Gaza.
Well, that would be interesting to see if that happens, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I mean, no, and that's what I'm saying. I think that that's a really easy application that the AI can't screw up.
I mean, unless it totally hallucinates and then, you know, doesn't know where Gaza is on the map, which isn't totally impossible. There's some evidence to prove that the more you use it and the more you train it in certain ways, the less accurate it becomes.
And that's like the social media chat bots that started out using accurate information and posting receipts and ended up becoming Nazi shit posters.
Well, that's because you know why that happened. Some of them found out was because they kept on trying to tweak it to get more and more views, and
Nazi stuff is what gets the most views in certain areas of the internet.
So all it did was search for which posts were getting the most and replicated those.
Yes,
and that's
which is just hilariously short-sighted.
So here's the question: if you program your AI to find the areas, right, with the most people and the most targets,
yeah.
What happens if it's after a while it starts running out of targets in one square, right? And that's Gaza, and then does it shift to some other close? But
this is a really good question. What does this explain? Why they're shooting all those targets in southern Lebanon?
Maybe has it shifted its priorities?
And Egypt as well. They said that there have been some attacks into Egypt from the IDF. So is that Egypt isn't far from Gaza? Is it generating new targets somewhere close?
It could be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised Egypt is taking that. I'm surprised all of the.
So the one thing that you do have to remember, and you may have missed if you haven't been paying close attention because the media is ignoring it, but it's been covered fairly well in Twitter. Yemen is at war with Israel now and appears to be winning.
Winning? I didn't.
They've taken a couple of Israeli ships, but it's hilarious because the IDF doesn't appear to be able to stop the Yemenis from taking their boats.
Well, isn't that the reason why we've just sent over 2 new cruisers?
Probably.
And a couple of other ships. What we're trying to do is the Yemeni is an interesting situation because the IDF can't. Well, it would have to cross Saudi Arabia to get to them.
I initially thought that they were accusing Yemen of bullshit when they said that, and Yemen fired a drone that the Navy took out over. Yemen fired it. But no, they actually fired the drone at Israel. And they're like, oh, yeah, we fired the drone at Israel. And, we're probably going to look for a chance to do it again. And, we're at war with Israel now on behalf of Palestine. Have a nice day.
Well, I mean, that is the most. The only thing I can figure is that the IDF feels that they're not a threat just yet, a real threat, even though they did.
You can Saudi Arabia and the UAE until recently.
So my question is this: if you don't think they're a real threat, right, that could get them some pretty big victories early on. You know, they could stop the traffic into the Strait of Hormuz, and they could do that. But can they sustain it? I mean, once Israel gets done with Gaza the way they want, are they going to do an about face and start sending planes to Yemen?
Well, I mean, so if they start sending planes to, if Israel actually attacks Yemen, then now you're in a situation where, okay, you're getting really, really close to home for countries like Qatar and Iran and Oman.
Mm-hmm.
They could all potentially, any or all could potentially either back Yemen quietly or join openly.
Well, I would think that Iran would almost have to openly join, given their support already for the.
Well, I mean, I've heard mixed reports about their support for Yemen being overstated, and that they're definitely not. You're definitely not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not Iranian surrogates in the way the U.S. was painting them. But at the same time, Iran makes a big deal about being the global leader of the Shiite movement and the global Islamic revolution, and so they kind of have to support the Houthi if they get invaded.
But the other thing is, maybe the IDF is waiting for us to do something. Right? They want us to open that front because they figure if we open it, that'll keep Iran out. Iran doesn't really have
the U.S. human rights intervention in Yemen for the good of the starving children.
First we starve them, first we bomb them, then we give them some food packets from UNICEF.
And while UNICEF is there, we conveniently use this as an excuse to put a military installation in Yemen where we can have the same sort of positioning as the stations we used to have in Saudi Arabia, but that fired the whole Islamic world up against us.
Well, I mean, maybe we'll bring the British back. Maybe they want another crack at Yemen territory. You know, that's 64. I think they're still hurting over that 64 revolution.
Well, there was that. Well, that was the whole thing. I mean, if we're to believe the spy fiction authors of the 70s and the 80s, the British were serious about their Cold War stuff on the Yemen-Aden border, and really, really, really wanted to make sure that the right side of the Yemeni civil war, the first one, all the way back then.
So I'm just saying that, you know, I mean, it could be everyone wants a little piece of that. We could get another Tony Blair-like guy into power there, and we got it made. We got partners in crime. We'll go split the country right in half. Look.
Well, BP had not been on the ball enough, and their oil leases in the Arabian Peninsula were Bahrain and Yemen, which just didn't turn out nearly as well as the Saudi and Kuwaiti leases that Exxon got.
Right, but they all need more oil because we're tired, because China, right? We gotta.
Yeah, but the U.S. is becoming the biggest producer again. The U.S. outproduced both Russia and Saudi Arabia. Biden is such a green president.
I know.
Is the AI telling Biden that, you know, don't worry, becoming the number one oil producer is the path to green energy?
Maybe. First, you got to break it. It's part of the break it first philosophy of Silicon Valley.
Yeah, we're going to disrupt the environment and then we're going to save it.
Well, they're going to sell you an AI application to save it, right? Know where each one of your recycled soda cans go. I'll tell you where they go. Out to the Pacific, half of them. You know?
So the fun fact is that the number one buyer of recycled aluminum in the world was China.
Mm-hmm.
And that was totally destroyed by Trump's trade war. And the recycled aluminum market has never recovered from Trump's trade war with China. And all of the stuff that used to be sold to China is just being sent to the landfill.
That's right. which is ridiculous because we need bauxite is not exactly one of the most common items on the planet's surface.
Yeah, but you can't expect the American industry to go to recycled aluminum.
It would be too poor.
But that's the thing is now China has sources for real aluminum and doesn't need recycled aluminum and has their own recycling industry to get better recycled aluminum than they can get in the U.S. And, it was just one of those things that was being maintained for the sake of having those relations in order to be able to say we're part of the capitalist world. Aren't we good boys?
That it put pressure on America, they thought.
Well, but it put pressure on China too. Well, it relieved pressure on China is the way to put it. Because you have to understand.
Do you really want to be the guy that says you just killed the aluminum recycling market in America as president? Trump did
talk about that, but yeah, he did. He killed the aluminum. He killed the aluminum recycling industry in America.
He should say it proudly. You know what? I put a smackdown on
that. His party is the anti-recycling party. Why not embrace it?
That's right. Tell him, look, those were Chinese jobs. You didn't need them anyway. Meanwhile,
that's the sort of thing.
So do you think we're going to get a nice documentary from Barack Obama's production company on it next?
Probably. But the contradiction of China is that you have a state party that really is, at least legally and on paper and ideologically, even if you can argue about how serious they are about it in practice and identify factions that may be more or less serious about it within the party. The central contradiction of China is that they are a socialist worker state committed to a communist revolution, but they don't want to end up like Cuba and North Korea. And all of the good and bad, and I mean, this is a legal statement. I'm not necessarily making a moral statement of principles or anything like that. But in the legal definition of the Chinese state, in its own articles, they are a worker state devoted to communist revolution. They cannot get around what they are on paper, and they have to try to reconcile with what they are on paper in some way. But the central contradiction is, in the 90s, they were given a choice by Bill Clinton: end up like North Korea or be more like the United States.
Well, I think by the 90s, it was already too late, right? I mean, they had just spent, almost 15 years under Deng Xiaoping, who was white cat, black cat, and he was ambiguous enough where he was letting it in at his own rate.
Here's the thing, and I mean this just totally. Obviously, Lenin would disagree. But Lenin is not necessarily the be-all and end-all of Marxist theory, even if you are a Marxist. You can make the argument that Dengism was absolutely a Marxist adaptation to the material conditions in which China found itself in the 1970s. The greater liberalization of the 1990s was a continuation of that. However, the new guy, who the United States is so terrified of, if we're supposed to believe our own media,
Xi,
he became important in the first place because he was a young guy who said, we need to be less like Deng and more like Mao, and we need to get back to finding our communist path. I'm not saying he is perfect. I am not saying believe all the propaganda you get from the pro-Chinese state outlets in the U.S. I am just saying it is fair
Don't
It
do
is
that to
fair
Danny.
and materially realistic to say that there is some truth to the fact that Xi represents an attempt for China to find its way back to something a little more like Bukharin, if not necessarily Lenin yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that what we saw there was that in the 90s, there was a real question of whether or not who was going to really take control of the party, right? Was it going to be businessmen or was it going to be staunch Maoists?
Well, and the answer has finally been, the answer has been given. We will let the businessmen make money, but if they fuck up at the expense of the Chinese people, we will publicly kill them. Is
it the expense of the Chinese people, or is it the expense of the Chinese government that they were shooting?
So here's the thing, and this is where you have to. So I'm going to give you both the Marxist answer, honest Marxist answer, and the pro-Chinese answer, because they're not as far away as it might seem. The Marxist answer is, in a worker state, the proletariat are the government.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the government has to act in the interests of the proletariat, and there will be times when it will appear that this is the government acting in its own interest. However, the remarkable thing about this is there comes a point where there really is, it doesn't matter whether you're privately acting in the government's interest or not when you shoot the billionaire. Because publicly, you are still shooting the billionaire in the people's interest, and that has a tremendously important reality as an action. It makes a statement as an action that even if you're only doing it for appearances, you are still willing to take the step of shooting the billionaire to maintain appearances. Remember, that is not a step the United States has been willing to take.
No, we give the billionaire a handout and tell him,
sorry. From the objective, materially Marxist side of the fence,
well, I still think
China is even if China is lying about everything, the fact that they are willing to deliver on at least some of their rhetoric to maintain the lie makes them materially superior to the West.
Sure.
Now, on the pro-China, the more slavishly pro-China position, you say, well, they're a worker state, and as a worker state, when they act in the interest of the state, they're also acting in the interest of the workers. Witness zero COVID. To which you can have a lot of replies about policy changes since, but the basic argument is still true as far as it goes.
Well, I don't know. I think that if we look at the fact that they have only one labor union and it's basically a state operation.
So this is the problem. China has become what Trotsky called the USSR in the 1930s, which is a deformed worker state. China is still a worker state in many ways, but it has been deformed by its favoring of PMC workers at the expense of the rest of the system on a somewhat liberal model since the 1970s, and definitely in an openly neoliberal sense since the 1990s. It appears to be correcting that internally to at least some degree, while still doing things like outsourcing certain labor to places like Samoa quietly in ways that are not as exploitive of Samoa as the United States is of the Philippines, but we're still considered imperialistic enough by one of the Samoan political parties to overthrow a president who had been a prime minister who had been in office for 20 bloody years.
Sure. I mean, there are some very good things that China's doing. There's no doubt about it. But I think that this notion of their of their actual worker state status is overblown at this point.
Well, and this is where you can make some very legitimate criticisms of China and its drift into becoming what the Shachtmanites called a bureaucratic collective. Now, I also want to say that I believe, to use Shachtmanite language, that they would never use because they were pissant social democrats who supported the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. I believe the United States is a Shachtmanite bureaucratic collective. It's just that it's a corporate bureaucratic collective and not a middle class government bureaucratic collective. Though there is a very big, what I would call the liberal class, which is the portion of the PMC necessary for the Beltway to run, that is almost part of the capitalist ruling class, despite technically being at the very top of the petty bourgeois. And that aspect is why I think we are drifting towards that bureaucratic collective. We do have a ruling class beyond capitalists if we really want to look at the people who make the governing decisions. If governing is really ruling, then these are the people who actually make the decisions of rulership on a day-to-day basis, even if the dictatorship of capital can overrule them when it feels necessary.
Well, isn't that exactly the same situation that happens in China? Basically, they're allowing a small not collectivized, but we'll say a small burgeoning, wealth class rise up high enough to control and interact with the states of like the U.S. and, mm-hmm. and Europe on an equal level. So that makes everyone feel happy. Capitalists like to deal with capitalists. But you still have the overarching, government, that's the bureaucracy of Marxism, that can, pick up the ones that do something they don't like and shoot them in the head publicly.
Well, and it's a tremendously powerful public relations statement.
Sure.
To be able to say to your people, a manufacturing crime was committed in your district, and such and such a person endangered your lives in such and such a way. Look, we're executing it.
Yeah, but on the same case, they're still letting, the guy from Taiwan, his factories still have nets around them so that when people get so oppressed that they jump out, they're like, oh, well, he saved them.
Well, and that is the deep contradiction of that is China today.
It is.
And I believe, and maybe call me naive if you want, I'm not. I would never call myself slavishly pro-China, and I would never say we should not be critical of. We should never surrender the right to criticize anyone. Yeah. The whole point of the philosophy of the United Front is we are reserving our right to criticize, even if we are choosing to do it constructively and judiciously, as opposed to launching polemics against everyone.
Call me a pragmatist, but you got to pick out the good stuff, and you got to weigh the bad stuff, and you got to say this is where you're failing, and this is where you're succeeding.
Yes,
poverty they succeeded on.
But from in a lot of, and on a general public health and safety level, they're succeeding on a level beyond the United States in most areas.
Education.
Now, yes. And you can talk about all you want about political freedom. On the hierarchy of needs, political freedom becomes an issue when all your other needs are being met. The reason that we're not seeing more people complain about the loss of political freedom in the United States is they feel like they have more important needs than political freedom that aren't being met by society.
Mm-hmm.
And because they don't associate political freedom with having those needs met, because of the way they've been miseducated about our society. I mean, that's one thing that you have to be able to give it to the communist education system. It is very difficult in a place like China or Cuba or North Korea, even when the party does go off the rails a little bit, to get around the fact that you're still teaching everybody that in the end the government is supposed to take care of people's basic needs first.
Oh yeah, that is.
And if you're actually teaching people that their basic needs are important, then you start to see ways in which people can take action to protect their basic needs. As you see in Cuba's demonstrations of direct democracy, which are sometimes very confrontational with the government, but which generally tend to end with the government doing what the people confronting it wants and initiating a bunch of amnesties and only arresting people who are actually doing something that can't be justified.
I mean, if you think about it, you would never see the kind of policy in China that they just, what was it, a year ago, the new family policy in Cuba?
Yes.
I don't think that would ever be seen in the way China is right now.
It's complicated. It's extremely complicated. On the one hand,
you have a whole
elements of their society are very socially conservative.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, those social conservative elements do not have the backing of law or the state. If you actually meet the medical requirements for transition in China, the state pays for your transition in exactly the way Republicans lie about it here.
I do know that, but I'm just saying that. But the openness, I mean, it's a huge hurdle, but that's mostly cultural in China.
But that's the thing, and it's a place where, unlike the United States, the force of law is moving against the culture and in defense of the people. We can talk about, authoritarianism in China all you want, but when it comes to queer rights, well, ultimately, yes, there are all sorts of cultural problems that in the actual structure of state power, that ultimately, because of the way the system is constructed, the state is going to be on the side of minority rights versus social conservatism because of the structure. We don't have that here.
No.
All of our structure is essentially based on saying, this bigot might have a point. We shouldn't get carried away listening to these commies talk about freedom.
That's very true. But we also have we have a case where, let's take, for example, West Virginia.
Yes.
Where it's pushing anti-trans bills left and right.
West Virginia is a good topic. I know people from West Virginia. I know people who live in West Virginia. Everybody I know who lives in West Virginia is at least an extremely progressive Democrat. And several of them are so angry at the Democratic Party that they are far beyond that now. So with that in mind, I will say that there is a lot of coverage of red states in the media that does not reflect the opinion of the majority of even voters in those states, but rather reflects the beliefs and rules self-imposed by political parties.
But I think that plays in perfectly with what we're talking about, the minority structure being totally excluded from the political framework of the state.
And Seth Sturm, who I've had on this show many times, to talk about how the language of inclusion and civil rights has actually been used in West Virginia to exclude minority participation in things like affirmative action committees, which, wouldn't you want the people who the program is supposed to benefit to have some say in the affirmative action process?
Nah, that's too logical.
See, that's really the problem. If the affirmative action process is still just an excuse to give your friends important jobs, is it really a challenge to the capitalist system?
No. I mean, look at how many committees are really just job placement for people who either donated a lot, stumped a lot for you. I mean, we have them all over. In every level of government, you see it.
And even and beyond government, you see,
Oh, sure.
you can say things like, well, Ben and Jerry actually has really good positions on X, Y, and Z. But then you have to say, but technically speaking, the company was sold by Unilever, and Unilever has been just quietly crossing out all those great recommendations made by the ethics committee since they bought the company.
Well, Ben and Jerry's to me has always been sort of a.
Well, of course.
On one hand, they want to sound like, oh yes, we're pro worker, but remember back, what was that, like 92, 93? They decided that they were going to have a CEO and he was only going to make 10 times the amount of salary.
Well, yeah.
And then the guy they got was like 160 times the amount of salary they were paying. But, if you go to Spain, you can find the Mondragon company, and they actually do have only a 9 to 10 times ratio between the lowest.
I mean, you have to remember, though, that at the same time, and this goes to prove some elements of that you have said privately true. Ultimately, despite the fact that it is a worker co-op and a tremendous success for the possibilities of anarcho-syndicalism under capitalism, ultimately Mondragon is a capitalist business seeking a profit for its owners.
Yes, it does. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm just saying, but they at least got the 10%, right?
Of course.
Ben and Jerry's didn't. Ben and Jerry's said, "Oh, well, forget that. That's too hard."
Well, but that's the whole thing. Is Mondragon, though, was willing, by the system that Mondragon does things. I don't believe Mondragon goes out and bids for a CEO the way American companies do.
No, it doesn't.
Don't they elect CEOs?
They elect them.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's a whole big voting process that they have to do.
That's what I thought. So all their corporate officers are democratically elected within the limitations of whatever the corporate system of democracy.
When they buy a corporation outside, like in Argentina or something like that, they don't change the structure at all, and they just give that weak answer, like, "Well, we can't do anything. They don't have the culture. Sorry." It's like, really? You can't.
Because it's a capitalist business playing by the capitalist rules, and ultimately, and this is something you've said, if you're still operating within that same capitalist structure, then ultimately the structure creates the necessity.
Mm-hmm. No, I do, but I'm just saying that there are certain bright spots.
Yeah,
I mean, like Lamborghini's 4-day work week is a bright spot.
Mondragon is a bright spot.
Now you just have to get all those little pieces together, put them together, and then kill capitalism while you're doing it, and then you're fine.
Yes, that's a very good way to put it.
Because if you're still doing the capitalist thing, you're going to have all the same pressures on the outside that force you.
And the AI is crunching. Well, how can we prevent this global revolution?
Well, I mean, that's the other funny thing, right? Like the Norwegians, right? That everyone's always, oh, the Norwegians, they're so great. They don't have.
Can I just say for the record that the Norwegians are not great?
I don't know. I've been to Norway. They're pretty nice.
I'm not going to say that. I mean, hey, no, I don't mean that there aren't nice people in
I know.
Norway.
I know. I was kidding.
There are no. I'm going to be really simple here. I'm going to do a Clarence Darrow. There are no good or bad people. There are people who do good and bad things.
Well, I don't know. He was pretty sure that monkey was bad.
Darrow was pro monkey.
No, was he pro? No.
Darrow was pro monkey. He was defending the teacher of evolution.
Was he defending the teacher? Was he defending?
The prosecutor was William Jennings, the famous prosecutor.
That's right.
William Jennings.
I always get the
fun fact. We talk about political circuses all the time. This is the perfect excuse to go down a rabbit hole now, dang it. If you really want to talk about political theater,
I always get that mixed up.
The Scopes monkey trial was literally a situation where a group of people on both sides of should we ban teaching evolution in Tennessee decided they wanted to test the law, found a volunteer to test the law for them.
Well, they had a committee meeting.
Yeah.
And he was the only one that would raise his hand and
he was the only one willing to do it.
And they said something like, well, if you get fined, it's like $3. We'll pay it.
Yeah. Well, and what it ended up is William Jennings Bryan actually ended up paying Scopes fine because of because they wanted the pro people, the people who were pro the ban, lost their nerve at the last minute and realized, oh my gosh, the Supreme Court is going to gut us. Clarence Darrow made us look like clowns. There's the other thing but both William Bryan and Clarence Darrow were specifically hired to prosecute and defend for the specific reason that they would play well in that part of the country.
And Darrow had just done the Loeb's case,
the Leopold Loeb case, and was just being trashed for that. But he really did play well to the local crowd, and when this is what they're going to say all this stuff in front of the Supreme Court, and so they ended up, in order to get out of having it tested at a higher level, the William Jennings Bryan paid Scopes fine so that he wouldn't have any outstanding claims against him. And then they found him not guilty on a technicality at the state Supreme Court so that it wouldn't get appealed to any federal courts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, after a while, they started to figure out how just to market it. I mean, they had a fair there. It was like the biggest thing.
So Dayton, Tennessee, another fun fact, Dayton, Tennessee is the home of Bryan College.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Named after William Jennings Bryan, one of the more academically respected crazy Christian schools in the nation.
Didn't know that. I don't know much about its academics, but I know it's there.
Its academics are really good, except in the area of science. Slightly.
You mean there just isn't a science department? It's just like the Bible?
I mean, it's Bryan College. It's named after the dude who argued against the right to teach evolution in schools. So you got to figure the science department is the creation museum.
You know, I've never been there. I want to go there.
I haven't been there too. I've read a lot of the jokes.
I'm going to Kentucky.
News coverage of it.
I'm going to Kentucky for Christmas. Maybe that's where my middle brother lives, and I'm taking the infirmed father and the old mother on the road trip, kind of like National Lampoons. Maybe we should go there because I have to see a place that has like Adam and Eve and Dino from the Flintstones put together. I just have.
Fred and Wilma are just Adam and Eve.
That's right, and I guess they liked bowling.
You have to do something when you get thrown out of the Garden of Eden.
But here's my question: if that's the case, right? They get thrown out, and they have 2 sons. Where the hell did the rest of the population come from?
That's what Clarence Darrow wanted to know.
I know.
And Cain knew his wife. Where'd she come from? Who? Mrs. Cain. Did somebody pull off a creation over in the next county? Sorry, I love that. I love Inherit the Wind. I know.
I was going to say you're quoting Inherit the Wind.
Clarence Darrow said in court because of the way it was rewritten in the movie and the play. The play is really based on things Clarence Darrow said in court, whereas the movie includes the best version of the movie, the famous one with Spencer Tracy and Frederick March and Gene Kelly, the one that most people have seen when they think of the movie, actually includes a lot of original material and stuff that was restaged in order to make more direct contact between Drummond and Brady, the Darrow and Bryan characters.
Yes.
because they don't confront, they don't talk to each other directly very much at all in the play, which is funny because the play, as the play points out, they were very good friends. They were, and they actually ate. Even the movie doesn't say this. They actually ate breakfast together every day before they both went to do their.
You almost have to wonder. I mean, if you're eating breakfast with your opposing counsel, is there not a conflict of interest there? Is this not being played up?
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. The whole thing was being played up.
I know, but if you're a judge, you got to be like, wait a minute, these two guys are having breakfast.
That's what I like. That's why the movie is so much better. That the movie and the play are so much better than the reality, because in the movie and the play is really about people who really have a serious thought about what we should teach in school, saying, yeah, it matters that teachers should be free to teach. And then you have the movie, which is a bunch of communists who narrowly escaped being blacklisted, saying the blacklist is bad.
That's right. I don't know. I still think the movie's great. I've never read the play.
Great. All three movies are great.
I've only seen the one with Spencer Tracy.
Yeah, no, it's really important that one understands that there are three movies.
I did not know that.
The second, both of the remakes were stagings of the play done with really fancy all-star casts.
Well, don't worry, because now there's AI. We can have an amalgamation with Spencer Tracy brought back from the grave.
The first remake starred Jason Robards as Henry Drummond and Kirk Douglas as Matthew Harrison Brady.
Not bad. Not a bad selection.
And had Darren McGavin from The Night Stalker as the H.L. Mencken character.
Now there's a guy that's a real, He
really delivers the line at the end of the play really, really well. He's just so nasty when he says to Jason Robards, "Excuse me, I've got to go write the story of an atheist who believes in God." And he's just laughing at Jason Robards like he really has totally changed his mind about the kind of person he is and doesn't even respect him anymore. And it really shows that in a way that you don't see that in the movie. The last scene between Spencer Tracy and Gene Kelly is such this warm moment of humanity where Spencer Tracy is holding out his hand and Gene Kelly really wants to take that hand, and you see it on his face, and then he just wills that moment away and comes back with a quip instead. And that's so great.
It is. Well,
but at the same time, the nastiness with Darren McGavin delivers that final line of the play in their version of the movies. I got to write the story of an atheist who believes in God, with such contempt for Jason Robards.
Well,
And then the third one, which is one of those, which was done for Showtime by the same producers who remade 12 Angry Men for Showtime, and as a result starred Jack Lemmon as Henry Drummond and George C. Scott as Matthew Harrison Brady, and it was one of the last things George C. Scott did before he died. And that one stars Beau Bridges as E.K. Hornbeck. And that's another one that's from the play where Hornbeck is really a nasty character and doesn't have that same humanity that you see from Gene Kelly.
Well, that's because H.L. Mencken was a really nasty guy.
Yes. And Gene Kelly is a more idealized version of Hornbeck and Mencken, whereas
from what I understand,
versions are more Mencken.
Mencken was just
Mencken was pro-fascist, and the newspaper he founded is now a white supremacist journal.
Yes. Well, I mean, he was a racist. They knew he was a racist.
He was a vocal and public anti-Semite who embraced fascism as a result.
But I mean, he liked to keep his racism quiet about blacks, especially.
Yeah.
He thought it was vulgar but when you read his diaries, you find out that he didn't like anybody.
No.
And
but H.L. Mencken was an equal opportunity bigot, though. He hated everybody from black people to Jews to Christians.
That's true.
The only people he didn't hate were people who thought exactly like him.
Which must have been just him.
Pretty much. I mean, there is a great book.
I mean, what is it? Didn't he
called Murder at the White House.
Didn't he translate the Antichrist by Nietzsche? And he really loves that. I mean,
Mencken was big into Nietzsche. Mencken really embraced Hitler and Mussolini in the 1920s.
And his Übermensch idea, I mean, he gets it all wrong, but he loves that idea.
Because H.L. Mencken really had this notion that the Übermensch was, someone like him.
That's right.
And he was really trying to embrace that attitude towards the world. Which is why he was such a scumbag in almost every way. Because, the least offensive Nietzschean is Nietzsche, and that's saying something.
I mean, Nietzsche made some interesting points about certain things, but
about
belief system.
With Nietzsche, you've got this whole. Okay, so how much of this is serious and how much of this is a satire of a certain kind of thinking? And how much does the serious part tie back into the satirical part? And how does that all fit together? And what does that really say?
But I like anybody who writes books with chapters like why I write such good books, why I do such good philosophy. You got to give that respect. I mean, the guy sells like 8 books, but he's going to be like, I do the best.
But it's just funny to see that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, all the Nietzscheans who come after and just, you're completely shading over the parts that a lot of people who try to take Nietzsche seriously say are satirical.
The worst are the ones that take the satirical parts and make them serious.
Well, that's where you get the Nazis.
I guess it didn't, I guess handing out that copy of Thus Spake Zarathustra in 1917 wasn't such a good plan. Probably Hitler got one.
The two most popular authors in, what was his name? Damn it. Just a sec.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite facts about pre-World War II Germany. And I want to make sure that's his name. So, the two most popular authors in Weimar Germany, and to an even greater extent in the German Empire of the period just before World War I, were Nietzsche and a German writer of fiction about the American Old West named Karl May. And the intersection between the popularity of Nietzsche and the popularity of Karl May is best illustrated by the fact, and also just his ubiquity in German culture as a whole too, that Karl May was the favorite author of both Albert Einstein and Adolf Hitler. Now, what's interesting about this, the Nietzsche and Nietzsche being the most popular nonfiction author and May being the most popular writer of fiction, is Karl May was a Rousseauian loud liberal whose Western novels were based around the exploitation of the Native American from a pro-Native American point of view. And his hero was not a white savior, but more a quiet witness who was referred to by his indigenous friends as Old Shatterhand because one of his hands had been broken and healed funky. And his books were the most popular works of fiction in both Weimar Germany after World War I and the liberal radical phase of the German Empire leading into World War I. So this and this juxtaposition is, like I said, is seen extremely directly in the fact that Adolf Hitler, clearly one of the bad Nietzscheans, is always said Karl May was his favorite author growing up. Those are the two guys. But Karl May is such an interestingly anti-European writer for the Germany of his era. And helped form the ideas about America for both the most left and most right of the German political culture.
Yeah. And, I mean, we can't deny the fact that the American West and what we did to the Native Americans became a huge inspiration for all the imperialists in the late 90s.
But that's the thing, though, is that, again, Karl May is very much on the side of the imperialized people and not the imperialist occupiers. Now, this is romanticized in the way that Nazism treats not so much the noble savage specifically, but the nobility of nature and the fact that the ancestors of the civilized Aryan race were the savage barbarians who took civilization over by grabbing it by the throat.
Sure.
And that sort of noble, so Karl May's noble savage was much more Rousseauian, and his hero is not a white savior, but a quiet witness to suffering who tries to help people on an individual level. And what you can only take that in the literal radical left-wing way, or in a romantic reactionary way. There's no way to make that comfortable for the liberal middle.
Just give me a.
All right, it looks like we are taking a moment, but I just wanted to think about that for a moment, that certain ideas can't be held on to by the middle because they invalidate each other. And so they can only be grabbed onto and interpreted in opposite ways.
I had a little question. Yeah, I can understand where you're going with that, but that is an interesting contradiction that, that they would pick the oppressed, but in a way, it fits with Nietzsche's Superman theory that they're a minority that have to wrestle away the control of society from the vast
while
majority.
Romanticizing the nobility of the defeated enemy.
Right. I mean, well, he does that again. He does that a lot in works like the Twilight of Idols and the Antichrist. Right. I mean, he romanticizes to a certain degree Judaism of all things.
Well, the thing that always makes me laugh is there ever more of a case of an open collaborator with the other side in a war than Plato's great political work being, this is why the Spartans beat us, guys.
Yeah.
Or just openly suck up to the winners of the last war. No. Everybody misses that fact about Plato and takes the Republic seriously. But I've always thought, this is him sucking up to the Spartans and the pro-Spart and the surviving and standing up for the surviving pro-Spartans in the Athenian political class.
Well, some of that, sure, but he was also a guy who really did. He was at the top of the echelon. Plato. He was a part of it. He was a pro-nobility. He did not like democracy.
Well, he did not like democracy because he thought democracy killed his teacher.
Wow.
He's such a pussy about that. He's really, really very butthurt about Socrates being made to kill himself by the democratic government of Athens.
And there's all kinds of questions of whether or not Socrates even existed.
Fun fact. There is more documentation for the existence of Socrates than there is for the existence of Jesus.
That's true, but
second fun fact. There is contemporary documentation of the existence of Socrates by people who didn't like him and had every reason to say he was fake if he really was. The most important argument for the real existence of Socrates is the fact that Aristophanes clearly knew him personally and thought he was a piece of shit.
That's because he didn't pay for anything.
But a piece of shit.
That's because he didn't pay for anything.
Among other things.
That was like the biggest complaint about him, was that he like come over to your house and like eat you out of house and home. And
well, that was one of Aristophanes, who was making a joke about the fact that because he was very active in this area himself. So anytime Aristophanes accused someone else of this, there was a joke about him probably having broken up with them. But Aristophanes was very, very big about the fact that Socrates is someone who is a teacher for the privileges of being a teacher, which is to say the culture, the sexual culture of Athens at the time.
Oh, now you got me thinking of Nixon. Why'd you do that? Now I got that clip of Nixon.
But I mean, you rarely see that kind of slur against a fictional person by one of their contemporaries. So I kind of agree. So I kind of believe Socrates was real.
I sure hope so, because it makes the stories better.
Well, I mean, Plato is obviously warping his idea of Socrates when you compare the statements about even other students, because Xenophon and aristocratic jackass kept changing sides, political and military genius, but selfish ass prick. Big Athenian deal, responsible for the Sicilian expedition, but they didn't trust him to command it. Why can't I remember his name? He's a big deal in one of the Assassin's Creed video games.
I wouldn't know. I don't play video games. I don't know. It's been a while since I've read the Republic, and I can't remember all the characters in it.
This was less of a character from the Republic and more one of Socrates' actual students who then testified to his existence.
Okay, let me see.
I'd
have to look that up.
Aristophanes clearly thought Socrates was real and funny.
And obviously getting too much food and too many of the young boys to come his way.
Exactly. And it's like, did he dump you, Aristophanes? Or are you jealous that it's somebody else?
Or he found him cheating on him with somebody else, and was not a good scene at that symposium.
It's just But yeah, so I believe Socrates was real because, his contemporaries cared enough to slur him and try to make sure that the anti-Socrates side of the story was out there. That's suggestive that he was real. Nobody's ever made an attempt. Nobody's gone to the effort of disproving Socrates. Some people have, of disproving disproving Jesus.
Oh, I know.
Or even the effort some people have of disproving Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was documentably real.
Yes, but then they come up with that other whole thing that there's no way he could have written his plays. He was just a front.
But that's the whole thing. If it really was someone as well educated as the Duke of Oxford or whomever, the Earl of.
Was it the Earl of Rochester?
No, it's see. That's the thing, is there are different. They're the Baconites, and then these guys are the whateverites. But I can't remember what he was Earl of. This is how bad I am at my Shakespearean conspiracy theories. But what it comes down to is that a bunch of actors who aren't very educated about history themselves think Shakespeare was too educated about history because they don't understand what he got wrong. And it's just hilarious. And it's these British snobs who have been given sirs by royalty who don't want to believe Shakespeare was a commoner like them, like they used to be.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Sir Derek Jacobi. That's all I'm saying.
For what I'm saying is that I think that, didn't the anti-Stratfordian movement actually start in America?
That's the one. Earl of Stratford. That's the one. Earl of Stratford.
Didn't it start in America, actually, that whole movement that Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare?
I don't know where it started. The highest stature Stratfordian that I know of by name is Sir Derek Jacobi, who is not quite as well known in movies as he should be.
Did he write the movie Anonymous, or give the idea for that one?
Well, so Sir Derek Jacobi is classically known to most people who have an appreciation of PBS for playing the Emperor Claudius in I, Claudius. For people who don't have enough of an appreciation of PBS or the BBC to know about I, Claudius, Sir Derek Jacobi is probably best known for playing supporting roles in Kenneth Branagh movies.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you could do Shakespeare, Kenneth Branagh had that whole decade and a half period where he did nothing but it.
And Branagh and Derek Jacobi is in some of those, and he is also in Branagh's true masterpiece, his hard-boiled detective novel about reincarnation, Dead Again. And you laugh at me, but that is Kenneth Branagh's true masterpiece. That is his best movie. It is the movie that proves he is great. It is why he was the only director who was trusted with the first Thor movie, and it's why they never should have traded him for any other Thor directors.
Oh, come on.
Because, if you've directed Shakespeare, then you can direct somebody dressed like Thor speaking weird.
Sure. You sure can.
But beyond that, Dead Again is a brilliant movie where
I haven't seen it in such a long time. I can't really remember.
The central idea is reincarnation, with the problem being, oh my gosh, these people are the reincarnations of the dead lovers, and one of the dead lovers murdered the other, and blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to give spoilers here, for which I apologize, but I don't believe most people are going to look this movie up. And if you're the kind of person who will look Dead Again,
it's 1995 or 6.
Yeah. If you are the sort of person who will watch this on my recommendation, then you probably will enjoy the spoilers a little. But this is a warning. If you're going to go watch Dead Again and don't want it spoiled, mute the audio now.
I'm ready. The spoiler.
All right. So the central conceit,
because I have seen it and I haven't seen it in such long that I don't really remember.
Central conceit is that Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson play both their characters in the modern day and the couple that they are the reincarnated versions of, with the obvious belief being that we will assume that Kenneth Branagh is the reincarnation of the character who looks like him, and that Emma Thompson is the reincarnation of the character who looks like her. Right? Simple, straightforward. Derek Jacobi is the fortune teller and psychic who is explaining their reincarnation to them and who their past lives were. The twist is that the Kenneth Branagh character is not the reincarnation of the dead Kenneth Branagh character, but is the reincarnation of the dead Emma Thompson character, trying to prove that her lover and husband did not actually kill her.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
And Derek Jacobi turns out to be the grown son of their housekeeper, who was a filthy pervert who was obsessed with the original Emma Thompson character, who was reincarnated as Kenneth Branagh, and who actually murdered her when he failed to successfully assault her. And he's not reincarnated. He's actually him old. It's just the other central characters who are reincarnated.
It doesn't, I mean, it's set in the 90s, but I think the action all happens in the 60s or the 50s.
50s or 60s. So so there's two sets of action. There's the action in the present and the action in the past. The action in the past is the murder and the revelation of the truth about the murder, whereas the action in the present is the modern Kenneth Branagh character, who it must be understood is the pissed off victim, who is mad because she's dead and her lover was convicted of her murder and executed wrongfully, confronting and killing Derek Jacobi.
Had to get that one in before 1964.
And saves the life, ironically in real time in the future, also saves the life of the reincarnated Kenneth Branagh character, who is now played by Emma Thompson.
Makes you just long for that movie out, Defending Your Life with Albert Brooks.
No, I like Dead Again much better.
I
love Dead Again. It's one of my favorite movies. I admit it. I am not a believer in reincarnation. It is the perfect story about reincarnation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know.
The idea of the male hero actually being the pissed off female victim in their next life is an interesting statement about social violence to me, and who is allowed to take revenge.
Well, that's true. It is. I don't know. I always get him. That period of time, it's Dead Again, and then bam, he's in Shakespeare, Henry VIII, and then all of a sudden he shows up in Wild Wild West, and I don't know what to do with that.
So the worst thing about Wild Wild West,
besides its racism,
the worst thing about Wild Wild West is the fact, well, obviously it's racism, but the second worst thing about Wild Wild West is the fact that they did not have Miguelito Smith as the villain, but gave us this weird Loveless character who had no bearing whatsoever on the name material and was just a generic villain somebody thought would look good in CGI, and was wrong. Let's be really honest that the worst thing about the Wild Wild West was the CGI, and that was...
What was the best you could get in 1999?
But that's the whole thing. The charm of the Doctor Who revival is that it's a lot of the corny stuff that made to look good corny as opposed to made to look too good. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, you always have that problem in the when you go for stuff that's in the 1960s.
But that's the thing is if you make it look too good and you lose the corniness, you abandon its charm. Best example, the 1990s Godzilla movie with Matthew Broderick. They totally abandoned the corniness of the Godzilla franchise in such a way that they could not get anything salvageable of a Godzilla movie out of it.
Oh, but come on. They got that great duo of Puffy and what's his name? Guitarist from Led Zeppelin. Not Plant.
Jimmy Page was the guitarist.
Jimmy Page, right? Yeah, Jimmy Page up there doing his version, a new version of Kashmir, which I hate anyway. And that was why that movie was made, so that we could get Puff Daddy and Jimmy Page with Godzilla in the background on a music video for 3 minutes and 85 seconds, or whatever the hell long it was.
You know, I have to say, the City of Angels version of the Iris music video by the Goo Goo Dolls is a better music video to justify the existence of a terrible movie. Iris is the one that goes, I don't want the world to see me because I don't think that they'd understand. And the whole joke of angels in City of Angels is that unless an angel really wants to be seen badly enough to fall, people can't see them.
I like the Wim Wenders version of that movie better.
So
I have a thing for Peter Falk.
Well, the simplest way to put it is that, the original German version of that movie is better.
Mm-hmm.
And the English version was a bad idea. As opposed to the American/British remake of the French remake of Death Takes a Holiday.
You mean Joe Black?
Yes, I love Meet Joe Black. I know that's not a popular position because it's such a damn long movie, but I love Meet Joe Black. It just hits all my old-time Hollywood nostalgia and at the same time anti-nostalgia buttons in precisely the same way as the Sidney Pollack version of Sabrina, which I also love and which is also an unpopular position.
Really? So you like Julia Ormond over Katharine Hepburn?
I do. Audrey Hepburn. And it's not that I like Julia Ormond over Audrey Hepburn. It is that the original version of Sabrina is very obviously an adaptation of a play.
Okay.
That is very obviously about two people. And all the other characters, with the slight exception of Linus, because he's the other person in the love triangle, all the other people are incidental to the two people the play is really about. Whereas the great strength of the movie is that that David and his future wife are people whose lives matter. I mean, the thing about the original is that David and his ultimate bride are not people whose lives matter in the sense of the story of Sabrina. They are obstacles to the happiness of Sabrina and Linus. First, David's wife-to-be is an obstacle to his happiness with Sabrina, and then David is an obstacle to Linus's happiness with Sabrina. And they are only important as blocking figures for the protagonists. In the remake, Greg Kinnear and Lauren Holly make their love story as interesting as the central love story and as important. And it really is pretty and sweet and touching in a way that it's not in the original. You don't care about them. The movie doesn't care about them. The movie persuades you that they are shallow, unimportant people you should not care about when their time has run its course. The sole redeeming moment of David's character is when he punches Humphrey Bogart in the mouth and tells him to go after Sabrina.
See, I've never been a big fan of Humphrey Bogart movies in general, so
I'm a huge fan of Humphrey Bogart as a comedian.
Except for the African Queen, I like that one.
Another great comedic performance. You have to remember that Humphrey Bogart is in the African Queen is the movie that convinced John Wayne, if I can play a drunk too, I can win an Oscar, and he did.
What movie did he play a drunk in?
True Grit, which is the one he won an Oscar for. And he doesn't just play a drunk, he plays a drunk who can't load guns properly because he's drunk. And it becomes important to the plot that he's a drunk who can't load a gun properly when he's been drinking too much.
It happens. It also has a young Robert Duvall in it.
It does. True Grit had Robert Duvall in it. And the great, great, great acting teacher who was blacklisted for most of what would have been his prime career plays the other bad guy, Jeff Corey, who if you talk to anybody who studied under him during the period he was blacklisted, because he spent the whole period he was blacklisted in Hollywood teaching at the Actors Studio. Anybody who studied with him says he is the greatest teacher they ever had, and it's a crime that he wasn't allowed to have a career as an actor until he was an old man.
Yeah, well, thank Gary Cooper for that one.
But he played Tom Chaney in the original, and so he was both the main heavy and the writer of True Grit were blacklisted. And the star of True Grit, who won the Oscar off the supporting work of blacklisted commies, I exaggerate, because actually Jeff Corey and Marguerite Roberts were not commies. They were stuck-up liberals who felt very superior to the communists they had left behind. But they also, because they were stuck-up liberals, were not going to name names because it was about them and not the FBI.
That's right.
But and the big reason that John Wayne stood up for them is because he knew they weren't communists and not because he really felt strongly about the rights of the blacklisted. He had been a big part of the blacklist.
Sure. There's a lot of competition he got out of the way.
But again, I mean, the movie he won an Oscar for was two of those blacklisted talents making the movie that the old Nazi could win an Oscar for.
He was not a Nazi. He was Nazi adjacent.
It's true. He was one of those anti-Nazi fascists of the World War II and early Cold War period. He was fine with but when we say that John Wayne was not a Nazi, we do have to remember that he did make the Sea Chase.
Yeah, well, he is just a strange guy.
Where they make you sympathize with the Nazi German crew by making them all sound American.
Well, that's what I'm wondering about. Did you know they've remade Das Boot?
Yeah, I knew they remade Das Boot, but the remake of Das Boot was like a shot for shot.
No. It's a television series now.
Oh, now that I did not know.
And it's set like 6 months after the original movie's time period, so I guess it's later in 43, 44. And so, I mean, how do you root for that? I mean, like now we're rooting that the Allies don't get the Enigma code that sinks the U-boat. These are like the only good.
Well, at least at the Sea Chase, it was a civilian freighter, and you could pretend that there was suspend some disbelief that they weren't actually Nazis if you don't know the history and don't understand that the captain of the freighter was a registered member of the party, because you had to be a captain of a freighter in the German merchant marine at the time.
Well, I mean, what's his name got away with that he wasn't really a Nazi, even though he was a Nazi.
Speer?
No, I was going with our favorite.
Von Braun.
Martin Heidegger.
Oh, Heidegger. Yeah.
No. I just kicked my Hurstler out to get his job. Became a Nazi, but I'm not really a Nazi.
My favorite is still Von Braun, simply because his autobiography turns itself into the best book never written joke ever. I aim for the stars, but I keep hitting London. By Werner von Braun.
Antwerp. From Antwerp to London in 3 minutes.
The V1 and the V2. The V2, the product, the biggest, the most successful German export you don't know about.
The funny thing is, right, he always went through the whole, after the war, he kept on claiming, no, I didn't know about any slave labor building my missiles. No. And then there's like all these records, like 60 forced laborers brought to Peenemünde.
Simple fact. Simple fact.
He's there at Peenemünde at the same time. They're at Peenemünde.
The most important thing about Schindler's List is not the way that it shows how a flawed person did a good thing in a terrible situation with the best he can. That's not the important part of Schindler's List. The important part of Schindler's List is it shows that all the factory owners were Nazis who knew they had slaves.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
and that this was the only one who tried to do anything to actually benefit the slaves. Only this guy, just this one dude.
That's very true. I mean, but that's what makes it so funny when you hear, I mean, our whole Operation Paperclip was just our snatch and grab of everyone.
Well, but all the people all the scientists and academics who we could grab with any sort of plausible deniability. It's the Gladio defections that are really the scary and damning ones. And the Gehlen organization and all the other blatant recruits of people we knew were Nazis because, well, they're the most reliable anti-communists we can find in Germany right now.
I don't know. I mean, let's see. We took Barbie out of France.
The settlement of Ukrainian Nazis in Calgary because the Canadian government wanted more anti-union voices in the working class of Alberta.
That's right.
That's so scary because now one of their granddaughters is deputy prime minister.
That's true. Well, you know, I come from a town that actually had, in 1937, a Nazi day camp.
Yeah.
For the American Bund. The camp's about 2 miles from in my hometown from where I used to live.
Hey, people in Queens are near Flushing and Yonkers, and Flushing and Yonkers are where the United States settled its reliable anti-communists from Ukraine after World War II.
But it's just so funny, right? I mean, this little town, right? And what did it look like? It must have looked like a little brown shirt organization running around.
The joke that someone should write about All in the Family is that in the real Queens of the 1950s and 60s that represents, Archie Bunker had a Ukrainian accent. I'm only joking a little bit.
And a picture of Stefan Braden.
Bandera.
Above the mantle.
The founder of one of the two openly we worship Bandera as our founding political parties in the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. A man named Roman Zvarich was born in Flushing and moved back to Ukraine in 1991 when the government gave all the Ukrainians in the U.S. and Western Europe the right to return if they wanted, as long as they gave up their citizenship in their country of origin. And after returning to Ukraine, and this is why one of the reasons I say Ukraine is much more like Israel than like the Palestinians. After giving all of these children of Ukrainian Nazis the right to return, and they did, giving up their U.S. citizenship to become Ukrainians. See, dual loyalties is not just for Jews anymore. The Ukrainian Nazis openly went back to Ukraine, but make a great deal about the fact that they were Americans, especially in the 90s when they were very much part of the reason that Americans felt comfortable with the Ukrainian government. The justice minister, he's got an American accent.
That's right.
But, you know, the reason he has an American accent is because his parents, who had Ukrainian accents, were Nazis during World War II. You know, you remember all those Robert Ludlum novels, not the Bourne ones that are more famous now, but all the ones that had some sort of thing to do with Sonnenkinder and Nazis being still around in the 70s and 80s. That was nonfiction. You understand that now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I really want everyone who ever read those Robert Ludlum Nazi paranoid thrillers where, you know, the secret is that the military in France is run by a collaborator with the Nazis. It's like, the secret is it's real and not a secret, and that part is nonfiction.
Well, I mean, NATO. I mean, the first general of NATO was a former Nazi general.
And Ludlum is just pointing out all this stuff and giving characters fictional names in those books.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth.
It's not. The reason it's fiction is because he's writing a fictional story around it and changing the names. But if he were writing it as a documentary and saying this happened and this happened and this happened and using the real names instead, it would be nonfiction with only a few changes.
I mean, hell, we hired Barbie to go down to the South America and kill communists.
Well, this is the Holcroft Covenant.
Klaus.
The fundamental central conceit of the Holcroft covenant is that South America is just controlled by the children and grandchildren of Nazis who are openly backing American Nazis who are trying to take over America and get a Nazi elected president. And the only reason that it stopped is because one of the children of these Nazis decides Nazis are bad.
Well, and then there's always been a huge question of what happened to all of the secret police from Croatia.
That's part of Operation Gladio.
Well, I know, but I mean,
fun story about the number of there are not fun. That's not the. There are a lot of terrorist attacks on liberal anti-Tito targets in the 1950s who were blamed on Tito. Mm-hmm. That's what happened to the Croatian secret police.
Well, I mean, we know what happened, right? They went underground, and then when Croatia broke off in the 1990s, they showed back up, and they were the ones who were trying to push for some serious ethnic cleansing.
So the president of Ukraine, in its most openly pro-Nazi, pro-American phase, before Zelensky and during the first round of invasions, the guy who became our guy after we finally managed to get rid of the part Yanukovych. Mm-hmm. He was the leader of a group called the Ukrainian People's Movement. The Ukrainian People's Movement has the same political roots as the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, which is to say that the Heritage Foundation gave a bunch of money to a bunch of Russian and Ukrainian Nazis during the last period of the Cold War in the expectation of Nazis being well positioned when all these countries became democratic. The Ukrainian People's Movement and the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia have always stopped just short of embracing actual Nazism for precisely the reason that they are Nazi parties and are trying not to show it openly.
Yeah, it kind of lets it out of the bag too early.
Well, it was let out of the bag when Petros Poroshenko went to war as a common enlisted soldier, openly brandishing his Nazi regalia just a year or two back now.
Yeah. You know, I mean, that's the real problem we have. And sort of, we got a lot of these splinter groups who were using to fight communism that have now grown, can't be controlled. And
again, all those anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jews are just true about Nazis and not Jews.
Yeah.
It's another one of those every accusation is a confession thing.
I always like those where you find those anti-Semitic theories the most in the most unusual places on the internet these days.
Because people,
well, it's, you know,
people have very shallow ideas of what it means to be left-wing and anti-establishment, and you see people say things like, well, Zionists control America. No, America controls Zionists. You got it backwards. The dictatorship of capital controls any movement that can be used to benefit capital.
Now, that's an interesting question, getting back to Zionists, right? I mean, you really have to wonder what exactly is going to happen in Israel when they start really getting into the AI game, being the desert.
Well, here's another question for you, though. And this is the part...
Considering how much water usage AI requires.
So here's my question to you. What is, and I'm really interested in knowing this. I would really love to see if anybody finds Israeli journalism that answers this question, please share it with me. I'm really curious about what the average Israeli on the streets reaction to the American withdrawal from Afghanistan and the collapse of the Afghan puppet state was.
We'll have to go look that up.
Because, and I'm not trying to draw too broad a direct line between one American puppet state and another.
Well, one puppet state.
How do you think the hardcore Israeli right and even the squishy labor Zionist center right trying to claim to be progressive in some way, how do you think they grapple with the fact that the supposedly progressive and feminist and popular American style government in Afghanistan just collapsed?
Well, I'm sure that they feel that they have a longer tradition of self-government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true, they do.
But their long tradition of self-government is equally dependent on the American money tap.
It requires $17 billion at least a year before we went into this little overdrive period.
Mm-hmm.
And that says a lot.
Let's remember that we're not far removed, and it's kind of hard to it's kind of funny to remind people of this now when his position has changed in some ways. Though I will give him credit for working to spike the actual aid money in the Senate and voting with the Republicans to kill the aid to Israel and Ukraine.
Oh, we're talking about
so I give Bernie credit for that.
Well, Schumer did it too.
Yeah.
Which is unusual. So Schumer said on procedural. So there must have been something inside that bill that was just totally outrageous that they did.
So there was something in that bill that was there was the stuff that the Democrats publicly said was bad in the bill that made them all want to oppose it as a concession to the Republicans. But those are things that the Democrats would do anyway if it weren't seen as a concession to Republicans, as witnessed Joe Biden ending all meaningful COVID aid.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there had to be something else in it. I haven't read the bill, but there had to be something quite detrimental, not to the American people, because I don't think that Schumer would give a damn about that, but to something that directly affected his own interests.
Well, Schumer is interesting because
we don't call him Wall Street's Democrat.
This brings up something that I saw the other day, and I think I mentioned in passing to you privately.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Cornel West has his first organization endorsing his campaign, a group called Operation Power in New York City. Operation Power is run by a husband and wife team, Charles and Inez Barron.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them have been city councilmen and state assemblymen. Yes, they have traded the city council state that Charles Barron appears to be losing back and forth. Charles Barron was Hakeem Jeffries' primary opponent in 2016. So he is someone who is blatantly and aggressively pro-Palestine and anti-Israel in his politics, and who has been repeatedly accused of anti-Semitism by the pro-Israel communities in New York City for most of his career as a result, and who is losing to an opponent who is blatantly pro-Israel, it looks like, based on coverage of recent numbers.
I have to say that's one race I haven't really kept up with.
But his organization endorsed Dr. Cornel West's independent candidacy for president, based on the long association that they have had as activists,
mm-hmm.
and their committed membership in the same community on the same fringe of Democratic Party politics on the left. So the endorsement is showing that there are people in the Democratic Party who don't want Biden.
Oh,
and
sure.
They are Black.
Well, I mean, isn't that always been the joke about Biden? I mean, in the 1980s, he was totally into the whole anti-welfare Black image that he projected repeatedly, while also trying to claim at the same time that he somehow did all these amazing marches that he actually, back in the 80s, he had to actually admit on television that he didn't do them.
But here's the real fun contradiction of Joe Biden. His first explosion onto the scene in Delaware politics was as an independent who didn't want to be a Democrat because he didn't want to be associated with segregation, and who was a campaign hanger-on to a anti-segregation Republican candidate for governor who was running against a Dixiecrat.
Mm-hmm.
Biden's support and his father's money were central to that guy winning.
Yeah.
Biden then became a Democrat to run for a county supervisor position, but was a champion of what can best be described as the kind of economic policy that Martin Luther King Jr. was actually pushing before he was shot. Biden was proposing unlikely but good ideas like moving affordable housing projects from the city to the suburbs to directly counter white flight.
Mm-hmm.
And he was elected on this, and his position as a county supervisor was remarkably pro-black when you look at his career since he ran for the Senate. He ran for the Senate based on his career. Look at me. I put what's right over the Democratic Party. And since getting into the Senate, he has sold out to Reagan Republicans and Nixon Republicans ever since.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is like the short, like, heyday period, the first election, 72, where he still kind of keeps those values. But by the time you get to the mid-70s.
Well, by 1973, when he's actually in the Senate, he is opposing an amendment to a budget bill for what was then the Department of Health, Education, and Services that reversed Brown v. Board of Education by saying, sure, the Supreme Court decision is still on the books, but we're taking away at the state and county level any ability for the federal government to enforce this.
Yeah. He did that repeatedly.
Yes.
There was that big union fight in 77 that he just totally.
Yes.
He totally screwed that deal for the union. And then, but again, he's always played this duality
working class Joe.
Yeah, well.
But, let's talk about working class Joe's dad, who owned a used car lot, gave him a Corvette for his 18th birthday, and was a significant donor to local Republican politicians.
Working class Joe wasn't always working class.
Working class Joe was never working class. Working class Joe's entire claim to being working class is the fact that he was the first person in Neil Kinnock's family to go to university.
Well, that's part of that. But I was going to say that there was a time when they did, right after World War II, when his father had mismanaged a company, and they had a serious downfall, and then they had to build themselves back up again.
I'm sorry, not Mrs. Baroness Kinnock just died recently.
She did.
Yes.
The first in her line for 1,000 years to become a baroness and a college graduate? My God.
Well, she was. Well, I mean, so Neil Kinnock was. This is just hilarious too, because he was someone who was considered really on the left in the 1980s in America, and even the BBC was so scared of him winning that they made a movie, a very British coup, about what the military-industrial complex in the UK would do if Neil Kinnock won. And Neil Kinnock wasn't even the actual lefty in the leadership fight that year. That was Tony Benn. But even the guy who won the leadership fight was still seen as the most left-wing and socialist leader of labor in years, and they made him a baron.
Well, you have to that's one way of getting him out of the labor movement, right?
Now, to be fair, his wife refused to use the title Baroness all her life, but she's still on the books as one. But yeah, she died.
It's a shame.
A couple weeks
I missed the old Welsh windbag. Yeah, but when he stole that,
little Neil Kinnock, a little more Neil Kinnock and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn, and a little less Keir Starmer, please.
Well, Keir Starmer, he's not a leftist. He would take that Baron title and run with it.
Oh, he's already a lord. Lord
Is he
Starmer.
already a lord?
Yeah, Lord Starmer.
Oh, wow.
Lord
I didn't
Starmer.
know that. But yeah, so we were saying about him. I mean, and that's been his whole trajectory. I mean, so in 2008, when they said that, it was always a laughable claim in 2008 when they said that, well, Obama needs him to get the black vote. I'm like, Obama's already black. I mean, he's already telling the black story. You need Joe to get the white vote that still wants to keep them, in a separate part of town.
Yeah, Biden's working class identity has always been based on the leaning over to the the comfortable white labor aristocracy of the 1970s and 1980s who were doing well enough to support Reagan, or thought they were,
well,
to say, hey, don't worry, I don't like them either.
That's right. You know, we got to keep this.
That's what his working class identity is built on, really.
You know, we got to really keep this neighborhood, you know, white, like the Hallmark Channel.
But you know, to his credit, Joe Biden is more like the Hallmark Channel and less like the channel that appears to exist because Candace Cameron Bure was losing too many jobs to Holly Robinson Pete.
Yeah, who then got the boot all of a sudden.
Well, you see, they're trying to fight back for that white Christian demographic.
And you're certainly not going
to get... And I mean, there's a limit, and the Republicans seem to be grasping it around the edges. There's a limit to how far you can sell white nationalism with black voices and black faces, because your core audience doesn't want to hear it from black people.
Well, they do on occasion.
On occasion, but not enough to make Larry Elder governor of California.
No, not enough to make him, or even to make,
Tim Scott president.
Yeah, you know, Tim Scott didn't even really get a shot. And the worst part was they didn't even trust that he dated a woman. They thought he had some man stashed in the corner. He had to bring out some white chick with blonde hair to try to appease them, who may or may not really be his girlfriend. No one really knows. That's the funniest part of the whole thing.
So, let's not pretend that people don't have their issues. If you want to talk about this issue in particular, begin and end with the fact that Martin Van Buren was buried with his best friend and not his wife.
That's true.
He was a Democrat, different kind of Democrat.
I don't think he'd be on the party list today.
I don't know. I mean, I think Martin Van Buren and Andrew Cuomo have a lot in common. They both ran the New York State Party in sort of the same way.
Into the ground?
No, to his credit, Martin Van Buren was the guy who made the New York State Democratic Party what it became, before it was driven into the ground by Andrew Cuomo.
Cuomo's really although supposedly he's if he wanted a job as the mayor of New York City, he could get it today. Eric Adams is such a divisive character right now that they even take back
Eric Adams is another example of that you can only go so far with white supremacy and a black salesman, because again, that's not the target who your target audience wants to hear the message from.
Oh no.
And the problem is that the people that you think will accept the message because of the messenger won't necessarily. Because when people talk about what people don't want you to remember when they tell you that Eric Adams lost in Manhattan and won in all the other boroughs is that, Manhattan is where Harlem is.
That's right. 125th Street. Oh.
But that's the thing, is that Harlem was also, and this is Manhattan, not Brooklyn.
Yeah, but they've been trying very hard to make Manhattan very white, especially Harlem.
Oh, I know. But Harlem was the only city council district in New York that elected an abolitionist in that election.
That's true. But yeah,
she won as a Democrat despite endorsing the Party of Socialism and Liberation candidate for mayor and campaigning with her as a team. Which goes to show you that the Party of Socialism and Liberation could win a mayoral race in New York City if they got just even the small attention that a Democrat could get.
Well, that's true. There's a whole lot of reasons why. But every time you try and get something like that in New York City, you get one serious problem. You get all these hanger-ons that show up, like the Andrew Yangs.
Well, and the real problem is that even when New York City did elect a socialist, the best they could do was.
You say Ed Koch?
No, he wasn't a socialist.
I was going to say he wasn't a socialist.
Funny is the socialist mayor of New York was a Republican, Fiorello LaGuardia. Fiorello LaGuardia was an actual socialist who was a registered member of the Socialist Party of America on the local level, also registered with the Progressive Party of New York, but who ran as a Republican because the Progressive Party of New York didn't have a ballot line in those days.
And the Democrats wouldn't take him.
The Democrats, both he and his friend who ran as a Republican for Congress at the same time, were thrown out of the Democratic Party of New York for being socialists.
That's right, yeah.
And were accepted by the Republican Party of New York and won as Republicans.
But what I was getting at is that we have such a problem, right? I mean, they purposely muddy the races in New York with all these hanger-ons like, Andrew Yang and some other high celebrity that pops out of nowhere. And that just stifles all that local.
Well, and that's the whole thing: is how can the PSL get any traction when you've got Andrew Yang soaking up all the attention? Especially when people pretend that he's legitimately progressive or legitimately wants to change something. Because remember, the media treated Andrew Yang like he really represented some radical break.
Oh yes, that's right. I mean, he never does. I mean, his forward part is just some kind of cash scheme.
The backward party, as Trotsky would have called it.
I don't know where they're going forward to. I mean, they have no ideology other than forward.
One thing I really do appreciate about Trotsky was his satire.
It was good. I guess Yang would be a dentist for. Yes. A good
Trotsky
communist.
Would definitely call Yang a dentist.
Because what does he do? I mean, he just comes up with these ridiculous things, puts them out there, and soaks up a ton of space.
So Andrew Yang, and this is the worst thing about it, and this is the part that I don't like, because even a lot of critics of Andrew Yang call him a tech bro.
Oh, he's not.
No. Andrew Yang was a corporate lawyer who realized that he could use a non-profit to do venture capitalism without having to have a lot of venture capital.
Yeah,
he put together nonprofits to do venture capitalism on the government's dime.
Yeah, it's all grant money. That's how he funded his first operation, basically.
And he has not personally made a whole lot of money off of it in the direct sense, but he's indirectly made a whole lot of money off of it in ways that don't come back to him personally, but go to things like the Forward Party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Remember back in 2010, 2012, when he was going to revitalize the Midwest, and that with his incubator. I mean, it was just a business incubator plan, right? You take the smart kids that you find in colleges and you stick them all over the place. And
we're going to send smart entrepreneurs that we discovered at MIT to urban Baltimore, and they're going to gentrify the community and make it more democratic.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, they needed jobs that they were creating jobs that the community couldn't support because they weren't software engineers in the community.
Well, and that's the whole thing, is like the whole Foxconn thing in Wisconsin was the same thing. All these promises about this Foxconn plant that would bring in so many jobs. And they eventually built the plant, but the only jobs that were hired locally were management jobs from other companies that were already so it didn't create any new jobs.
That's not true.
For locals.
It didn't make new jobs.
Create new jobs for people who moved in from other places to do technical jobs at the Fox complex.
What I was going to get is, remember when they tried to use it as a tree plant?
Yes.
As a tree farm, so they made some new jobs with a guy watering the tree for $9 an hour.
Yeah.
Or whatever low funds they could do that. So I mean, they at least could put that. Look, we got 2 guys that water 100 trees.
It's like Amazon. Not one of the jobs created by Amazon in Long Island City actually went to anyone who lived in Long Island City. They all moved to Long Island City from someplace else and helped gentrify it.
Oh, sure. I wasn't disagreeing with you on that. I was just saying that the irony is that the new jobs they really did create were so pathetically awful. They're like security jobs to drive around in a cart, and then they had that stupid tree farm idea that they were going to use the grounds for because they couldn't figure out what to do after Foxconn pulled out.
Yeah.
And that's where we are.
It really is miserable being a security guard. I did that. I didn't like it.
Well, it's low pay. Terrible hours.
Yeah, and you can't even collect bounties anymore.
I never thought of that.
Well, no, because you see it's funny because the big companies in private security. Now, this is when I was working in security. All these companies have been bought out now, and it's completely different group of names. But when I was working as a security guard for a little tiny fly-by-night company, the 2 big corporate names were Pinkerton and Burns.
They're still around.
Well, Pinkerton is owned by someone else now, and so is Burns. Neither one of them is still the original anymore.
Oh no, but I'm just saying, but they're still around in the sense that
but
cybersecurity is their new shtick.
But Burns were the Burn Wilkes guys, the guys who are even worse than the Pinkerton guys. And Pinkerton is the other one that survived. And these were people who hired out labor unions to collect bounties for assassinating union leaders.
That
Tom Horn was a Pinkerton. When Tom Horn was a Pinkerton, he was taking $300 a head to shoot rustlers who were really small farmers who had staked claims on land that was supposed to be open range in the mines of the big cattle barons.
Yeah, that was
$300 a head to commit murder. And the only reason he got in trouble was because he shot the guy's kid instead of the guy.
Yeah, well, sometimes that happens when you get too itchy on the trigger finger.
Well, there's all sorts of arguments made both ways, but the whole point that was finally made and why they convicted him and why they hung him is because regardless of whether he shot the right person or not, he was there with intent to commit murder. That's what they were paying him for.
That's right. He was a hired killer. But I mean, that's always been the way with the so-called private security.
Well, I mean, and this is why
they're really private armies. Let's not deny.
Well, this is why the PIs in Dashiell Hammett's work are so amoral, because he was actually a communist and he was writing with some realism about the people with whom he had worked. And he was trying to make a point about, look, these guys are the crooked flunkies of capital. They're in it for themselves because that's the system we live in.
That's true.
And I think that people lose the socialist realism in Dashiell Hammett sometimes.
I think people lose a lot of that when they watch too many
Humphrey Bogart movies.
Well, that too, but just cop show, just any cop show in general.
But yeah, no, I mean, but still, I mean, you can bash Humphrey Bogart all you want, but the Maltese Falcon really does bring out that amorality of the private detective. And Bogey does it very well.
That's true. That's one of the few. But I mean, when you watch all the cop shows, they're just, cops are always right. They're always a bad guy. They always solve the crime. And
well, I should note that if you actually read the Maltese Falcon, you're very disappointed that you're looking at Humphrey Bogart and not a 6'2" blonde.
Oh, he's that much taller?
He's not just that, but he's blonde haired and blue eyed. In fact, the shorter sequel, actually a prequel, but it was the shorter follow up to the Maltese Falcon is called Blonde Satan. And the blonde Satan to which he refers is Sam Spade.
Sam Spade's a Nazi?
He's not a Nazi.
I know, but
because remember, communist actually. But
I was just kidding.
But Sam Spade is very much the good-looking blonde guy in the action hero mold of that era. If you actually look at the physical description of Sam Spade, you've got some of that Doc Savage stuff going on.
Just like how he's,
not Humphrey Bogart.
No, Humphrey Bogart's 5'8" at best, and brown hair.
Humphrey Bogart was a man whose only use who only looks tall in movies because James Cagney is shorter.
I can feel that. I feel his pain.
There's this Angels with Dirty Faces, where James Cagney is. So that's not the one. There's one movie with Cagney and a young C or D list Bogart. I can't remember which one. And Cagney's purpose in that scene is to make Bogart, who's playing the thug, look tall, because Cagney's the boss.
Yeah. Cagney was short, about 5'3". Yeah, but I have a theory that all the best film directors are shorter because they're closer to the film. Remember that old movie, Crazy People, with where he talks about where they came up with all these horrible ads.
My favorite, one of my favorite Rich Little routines. Talk about reactionary humor. But my favorite Rich Little routines. He's talking about Hollywood stars, and he draws particular attention to the height of Warner Brothers action stars when he says, Cagney, a tough little monkey. Alan Ladd, he was a tough guy too. He could punch you in the ankle.
A right cross to the ankle.
Again, another action hero from that hard-boiled era who was actually physically unimpressive compared to the modern action star who, you put Chris Hemsworth out there next to Alan Ladd or Jimmy Cagney, and they look kind of disappointing by comparison.
What's another guy? Oh God, he did a whole bunch of them. Like he did a lot of Sam Fuller. Bees. He was only maybe 5'10". Nothing really. Oh, I can see his face, but I can't think of his name. I hate when that happens.
Well, to be more recent and topical, Mel Gibson is Bruce Willis is only friends with Mel Gibson because Mel Gibson is the only person who makes Bruce Willis feel tall.
And now he can't even remember that.
And Bruce Willis. And Bruce Willis eventually, Bruce Willis is the only person who was ever too much of a right-wing asshole to offend Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone.
Did he?
Oh, this is my favorite Hollywood story.
I didn't know he offended them.
The one where the third one, yeah. Expendables 3, which has Harrison Ford instead of Bruce Willis. The reason Harrison Ford is their CIA contact in that movie instead of Bruce Willis, who was in the first two, is because Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone finally couldn't put up with Bruce Willis anymore.
I heard the rumor was that they said he had no work ethic, but I thought the reason was that he was starting to come down with his dementia and he couldn't actually do the function anymore as well.
And what I heard was that they were really, really upset because he had finally gone too far in the racist right-wing thing, conspiracy.
Oh, really? I didn't know. I didn't know that.
That was the story that was going around at the time. They were so pissed at Bruce Willis that
because I knew Bruce
turned with Harrison Ford, who's kind of a squishy liberal, as Hollywood people go, and famous for it, went with Harrison Ford on purpose because they were pissed at Bruce Willis.
I hope they didn't let him fly the plane.
Well,
They might land in a golf. They might land in a golf course or something, or on the wrong runway.
No, but that was the story that I had heard at the time. Now the dimension thing maybe makes sense, but I had heard that he finally got too right wing even for Arnie.
I hear Arnie's pretty. I don't know.
You have to remember Arnie is someone who was always friendly with the right kind of liberals. I'm glad this movie was made as a comedy. It wouldn't have been makeable any other way. There's a movie called See Arnold Run that stars the guy who played the dad in the original Dune movie.
Max von Sydow. Oh,
Werner Jürgens. Jürgen Prochnow. Jürgen Prochnow plays Arnold, running for governor of California, and Mariel Hemingway plays Maria Shriver.
Oh, wow.
And except for the fact that Jürgen Prochnow is clearly not physically Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, he makes up for being a better actor.
They're really, really, really on target with Arnold's sort of goofy, clueless, really kind of conservative, but likes liberals and doesn't want to be seen as conservative sort of mushiness.
Mm-hmm.
And how Arnold was the most popular Kennedy with the Democratic Party, and this was how we could take advantage of this Republican thinking. Because you have to remember there was a period, this was the period of time during Arnie's first term when Orrin Hatch had a constitutional amendment to make it fine for an immigrant to run for president because he wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger to be able to run for president. He thought that was the Republicans' best chance, and not somebody like W.
Oh, well, let's talk about that for a few minutes. How is it we have a guy like Cenk Uygur promoting that he can be a serious candidate given the constitutional legality problem of not being...
Hey, to be fair, everyone was fine with it when it was Rafael Cruz Jr. from Canada. Let's not forget that. I understand why you want to give Cenk a hard time, and Cenk deserves a hard time. But while we give Cenk a hard time for running for president despite not being legally eligible, let's all remember that nobody cared when it was Ted Cruz.
That is true. That is true. I forgot that Ted Cruz has got some questionable.
Ted Cruz is Canadian. His father is naturalized after leaving Cuba for Canada because he was one of the refugees who was just a little too pro-Batista for the U.S.
Guess he wanted Bay of Pigs Part 2 and just didn't get it.
Well, that's part of the reason for the Donald Trump joke about Ted Cruz's father shooting JFK.
Yeah.
Because he was vaguely associated with the Bay of Pigs.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just find that so interesting that this guy keeps on pushing over and over and over again that he's a real candidate. And
Ted Cruz ended up being the only alternative to Donald Trump. Remember?
That's true.
The liberals preferred choice to Donald Trump.
That's true. But the question is, how would that even work out? What do you do if you elect somebody?
John McCain wasn't even John McCain, but they wanted us to believe that Ted Cruz was John McCain.
At least John McCain, when he was born outside of the country, had 2 American parents, right?
Well, and he was born on a U.S. military reservation. Hey, and if you want to be really technical, if you're born on a U.S. military reservation, you're born on American soil.
True. No, I'm not disagreeing, but
this is what the principle of extraterritoriality behind the U.S. military reservation means.
Oh, yes. But what I was getting at is that it just makes me laugh so hard when he keeps on pushing this idea, Cenk, of being a real candidate. Like, First of all, he's never polled over 0.2% even in the
now that's a more serious criticism.
He's never polled over any of that, even in where he's known in California. That's all he was able to.
Let's remember that the people in his own district know him best as that guy who busted the union at his own workplace while he was running for Congress.
While he was complaining about others busting unions. But ITSE did get in.
Yes, they did, because he was basically publicly shamed into submission, is the best way to put it, and he set himself up for it. The most important thing about this is that one of the statements that he made, allegedly in his own defense, was, they're just doing this because they're mad at me for running against the establishment candidate. That's right. That's right. So why are you fighting the union and giving them exactly what they want, Cenk?
Well, I mean, but that's not the only thing. Cenk has been taking money from both sides for years.
No, I have one of the people that I am acquainted with and who I still occasionally interact with on Twitter, not as much as I used to, but we're certainly not friendly anymore, is a member of the union that unionized Cenk's business. And he said very sincerely, all the leaders of my union are shitlibs, and they're deliberately doing this to hurt Cenk. But his workplace should be unionized, and he's doing exactly what they knew he would do by fighting the union.
It's very true. I mean, but I'm just saying that he's what did he use? In 2004, he went to the former governor of Louisiana, Romer, Buddy, who had this huge venture capitalist group that he was running, took $4 million from him.
Yep.
He then went off to
the Jeffrey Katzenberg Disney.
Katzenberg, but that was a bit bigger group. Katzenberg was the big name, but it was a lot of other people.
But it still came down to Disney money at the time.
It was Disney money. It was other venture capitalist money, all from that side. And so, I mean, what is this guy's real position on anything? Then he's running. Then he turned his campaign, super PAC, into this We Revolution group.
In my opinion, Cenk, I hate it when I can't keep track. Cenk is like Glenn Beck. He is a former shock jock who discovered the real money is in politics and who found an ideology to believe in that he could sell. Now, I believe that certain elements of Glenn Beck's religious conversion are definitely genuine, but this does not change the fact that the sincere, true believer Nazis and the grifters are nearly always the same people. I will never repeat this enough. The guy who made a political fortune and literal fortune bringing the KKK back in Indiana in the 1920s also owned the biggest dry cleaning chain in the state and was making money off all those white sheets.
Just be unseemly to go in a dirty sheet to your next meeting.
It really would.
You might get kicked out of the organization.
How can you be the master race in dirty sheets?
And those cross burnings with all those embers and ash, that really gets in that cotton.
Now I'm flashing back to Blazing Saddles and Gene Weiner. I've told you about washing up after cross burning.
That's right. That's what I was thinking too.
For my next impression, Jesse Owens.
I mean, God, that was but no, I just keep on going back to him trying to promote himself as a serious candidate. And one half, he can't even be there. And the other half, he's never been a serious candidate. So take your pick. Which one do you want to dislike more for?
You know, the fact that he has zero, the fact that he is taken less seriously by the Democratic Party than Marianne Williamson is really the best judgment on his candidacy.
Yeah. I mean, and then we got Dean Phillips.
So Dean Phillips is running so that they can pretend Marianne Williamson doesn't exist. That's his purpose.
That, and he just wants to be your friendly multimillionaire from a long line of friendly multimillionaires.
Well, he's the same so-called independent style as that guy who couldn't really do anything but do push-ups, who came from Joe Biden's state in 2020.
I know the one you're talking about. I can't think of his name, but I know the one you're.
That's the thing. If you could think of his name, he wouldn't be nearly as important, because the whole point of him running was for him to be able to say, I'm an independent Democrat who votes with Republicans, and I think partisanship has gotten too bad. It's like, dude, that's the entire Democratic Party. Independent Democrats who vote with Republicans who think partisanship has gotten too bad.
And everyone's too on the left in the base.
Yeah. What they say is polarization. What they mean is Democrats are too much on the left. When they say tribalism, that they're really complaining about progressive Democrats, but they want you to think they're complaining about conservative Republicans.
My other personal favorite one from Delaware was what was her name? Stephanie or something like that? The one who thought the Wiccan witches were a problem. You know the one? I can see her face, but I can't think of her whole name. And I've been to a witchcraft's. I'm like, okay.
This is good, useful, actual information about Queens geography. Archie Bunker takes place in Astoria, which was transitioning from Italian to Greek. But the exteriors were Flushing. The Ukrainian neighborhood was East Village. Now, the guy who did ride-alongs for the Azar battalion and had a radio show sponsored by the Ukrainian People's Movement, he came from Flushing. So it may not have been the Ukrainian neighborhood, but that's where another one of the famous Americans in Ukrainian politics moved back to the mother country from, was Flushing.
Well, sometimes you just got to
believe, and I could be wrong, I believe the real Ukrainian neighborhood is actually the one where all the left-wing Ukrainians that they were worried about already lived in. But I could be wrong about that.
I don't know.
Because one of the big reasons for bringing in the former communists, the Nazis from the former Nazi collaborators from Soviet countries. I think that's probably the best way to put it, though it's cumbersome. Anti-Soviet Nazis from the USSR is easier, but Nazi collaborators from anti-Soviet movements is the whole purpose of bringing them over was that they were worried about left-wing Ukrainian and Russian and Jewish Americans being pro-USSR. And wanted Polish. To bring these guys and Polish, yes, and wanted to bring these guys into the neighborhoods to make them less left wing.
Pretty much that whole Eastern Bloc after World War II, they were scared that they were going to reunite.
Well, a lot of the people in New York State who really support the settler movement in Palestine now are people from the same revisionist Zionist groups that have won political dominance in the settler movement since. It's really important to understand that Bibi Netanyahu's father taught at Cornell at the same time that he was writing propaganda to convince other people to move to Israel while he lived in the United States.
Yeah,
and that both Bibi and his brother Jonathan were frequently derided early in their political careers for being American.
Have you ever been to Utica? That's its own special hell.
but that's the thing, is that for years, the political knock against
I know
Bibi Netanyahu and Jonathan Netanyahu in the Likud was that they're too American. They're not real Israelis.
True. I mean, but that's the whole funny thing about the whole entire Zionist movement, right? I mean,
yes,
they claim that they're not part of any nation, even though they already are part of a nation, right? Whatever country they grew up in, you know.
Well, and that's Russia. The whole thing, is there's lots of discrimination along the lines of what language do you speak and what country did your parents or grandparents emigrate from in Israel.
Oh, sure.
And not just the obvious stuff people talk about against Arab Jews and Ethiopian Jews, but also the political class, with the exceptions that prove the rule aside, just like in American politics. The political class is very much English and Hebrew speaking, with prejudice against Russian and Yiddish speakers. It's kind of ironic that in the so-called only safe space in the world for Jews, you can get yelled at for speaking Yiddish in public.
You know, it's hard to put it all together. And then you have the fact that, well, they did invade a whole country, right? So you got to expect that over time you're going to get some pushback.
And you know, and because of that pushback, it may not actually be as safe as advertised.
That's right. You know, it's like us saying, well, you know, Minnesota.
If it was really the safest place in the world, why is it a military state where only people with religious exceptions don't go to prison for not serving time in the military?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. We want them to be a military state. We want them to be on edge because we've been using them as a leverage point.
Israel exists so the United States can outsource fascism and deny responsibility for the things that Israel does, which is really just being done for the benefit of people in the United States and Europe and Canada and Australia. Don't forget Australia.
I mean, we were using them during the Cold War. We were using them as a check against the Soviet.
So there were two places that old line Afrikaners who didn't want to give up apartheid went after Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa. One of them was Australia.
Yeah.
But a whole bunch of them discovered their Jewish roots and went to Israel.
Funny. Dutch Huguenots have now find that their great-great-great-grandfather really was Jewish. Who knew?
And now, you know, oh, look, they've got their own neighborhoods now, and they speak English, so they're in with the right people, and they're learning Hebrew. Good for them.
And they don't like anybody, so they keep them back.
Hey, what is more welcome in any ethno state than new citizens who can afford to pay their taxes and don't like anyone?
That's gold. Get them an H-1B visa for America next. I actually know some true Afrikaners from, and some of them are the most racist people I've ever met.
Fun fact, though, the most popular political party with young Afrikaners between 18 and 30 is the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is the black party that was on TV who Tucker Carlson was trying to make out to be genocidal because they were saying, kill the Boer. Yeah, that's the most popular political party with Boers under 30.
Sounds... Well, they got a lot of problems in there.
There are lots of problems in South Africa, but there are reasons to be. There are reasons to be able to say, "Oh, look at this, though."
Oh, there are. I was just saying. I mean, their economy is still mostly based on the gold extraction of gold, and they have the same.
And the Boers still own most of the land because of but also even more importantly, the land and control the food supply. And a lot of that kill the Boer has to do with is about Mandela's land reform project, which was put on hold because of the compromise between Mandela and de Klerk, where de Klerk became vice president as part of the unity government. And they made a decision to keep the Boer landowners in place because they didn't want an economic disruption and famine like when all the farmers took off and left Zimbabwe after Rhodesia fell. People love to blame that on Robert Mugabe, and later on in his career, Robert Mugabe did a lot of unpleasant things, but the Boers. But land reform in Rhodesia was not white genocide.
Well, I mean, that happened also during the early South African when the English took over the colony. That they all picked up stakes and went to the Orange Free State, and and
what people don't understand closely enough is the real incident that precipitated the Great Trek was the British abolition of slavery in the colonies.
Yep.
They went to because they didn't want to let go of their slaves.
It was a land reform problem too for them. They also felt they were going to have to start giving land away to blacks and English, and they didn't like either option. So Orange Free State and Johannesburg, we come.
Yeah,
not Cape Town. What the hell's the name of it?
But is there anything more disappointing than a liberal anti-apartheid activist in 80s South Africa?
No, there isn't. But I mean, it just goes to show you that this pattern of behavior is just repeated over time.
Yes.
And as much as
it's worth saying, I mean, there are lots of things I say positively about Mandela for a reason. Mm-hmm. I believe that anyone serious about revolution in America needs to study closely why Mandela was in prison.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the sorts of roads that you would be traveling trying to make a revolution in the United States. You'd be looking at something like the South African model. Now, the downside of that is ultimately Mandela's revolution was only successful because he was willing to make certain fundamental compromises with colonialism and liberalism in order to get to gain the formal legal end to apartheid.
Yeah, but did he really end apartheid? It still seems that it's just so, like
and that's really the thing, is that if by apartheid do you mean do the Boers still own the land? No. If by apartheid do you mean do the employees on the farm need work passes to avoid having German shepherds sicked on them by cops? That's gone.
But there's still a great inequality issue.
There is, and that's why. And the inequality issue is why the Boers are so serious about their alleged belief in white genocide, because they know that they're the ones who are going to be taxed to pay for economic freedom.
That's right. And that's really the new type of apartheid that you see in the 21st century.
Well, and that's what you're seeing in education in the United States, and the fact that there's a real trend towards education segregated by race, class, and religion.
Oh, yeah.
And most importantly, segregated by class and religion that allows them to say they're not segregating by race.
Well, no one ever really wants to admit they're a segregationist at this point. I mean, there's not too many William Wallaces left.
Well, I mean, and you particularly don't want to admit that you're a segregationist if you're one of the black intellectuals pushing a white separatist educational system.
I don't understand how Cornel West can still be on that membership of that.
Well, but you have to remember that it's not just him.
No, I know it's not just him.
He's
But
the most famous name on that list, who isn't white, sure. But the president is a black woman. Another one of the board members is a black woman. Another one of the board members is a black clergyman in academia, but less known than Dr.
I mean, there are plenty of black.
But what they all have in common is that they are all committed to this idea of religious segregation in schools might be okay.
Well, yeah. And they're also, I mean, ironically, for the group is also overpopulated by anti-LGBTQ plus.
Yes, which members. Worries, which was my concern. So about West's candidacy when I learned that more than anything else is are we going to have solidarity with queer people when they're the ones being most fundamentally attacked by Nazis right now, and that's where the fight is.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the problem I have right there with him is what you say all this stuff about they're your brother and sister, and yet you join with these guys who clearly do not.
They're your brother and sister too.
So who is it? Who's your brother?
I mean, Joe Biden, Nick. Why can't I remember Nick's name right now? Nick Branna, and Bernie Sanders are all brother.
That's right. They can't all be on the same list, if you ask me.
And I understand why he's talking that way, and I understand the clergy outlook, but what about separation of church and state? I mean, is separation of church and state not a thing anymore because we can say the preacher is the right kind of preacher?
I don't know.
I mean, because that was one of the reasons Martin Luther King Jr. never ran for office himself, because he saw himself as a leader of a spiritual movement. Yes, it was political as well, but it was a spiritual movement and not a I'm running for president movement.
That's important. I mean, I really want to know, what is going on with the Cornel West campaign? It seems like it's languishing in a no man's area.
So I can give you my analysis.
Okay, let's hear it.
So originally, Dr. West ran for president because Nick Branna asked him to. He said so. He was very public about this. He did not hold it back. So he ran for president because one friendly acquaintance asked him to. And that was his brand. I'm running because Nick Branna asked me to. And that brand wasn't doing great. And then his brand became I'm on the Green Party. I'm in with the Green Party because Chris Hedges and Jill Stein asked me to be.
Seems like a lot of friends right now.
That brand wasn't working for him either. So now it's I'm running independent because I think this is the best way for me to win. And it is as an independent candidate that he picked up his first endorsement, the Operation Power Group that I was talking about earlier. Yeah. And running as an independent, the endorsement that he picked up was very pro-black, very anti-Israel Democrats.
True.
And now that is the Cornel West base. Very anti-Israel, pro-black Democrat.
But is he very anti-Israel, very anti-poor black?
Well,
very pro-black.
So that is his identity. Now, with that said, I do want to speak about another one of the former associates of Charles Barron, someone with whom he worked very closely. In the 1970s and 1980s, Charles Barron was very close to Al Sharpton. Al Sharpton is not as radical on the topic of Israel as Charles Barron.
I mean, well, the joke about Al Sharpton around New York has always been that he's, he can run a campaign from any a march as long as there's a McDonald's at the start and a McDonald's at the end. Back in the 80s, because it's always been about him and what his needs. I mean, I don't know. And he's always been, and now he's a figurehead on MSNBC.
But that's the real base. And I don't mean this in any sort of bad or insulting way, but I bring this up to show you the sort of thinness of what we're looking for, but also why it's the right way to go. Right now, Cornel West's campaign is geared towards the people who supported Al Sharpton's primary run for president in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a bad way for a Cornel West to market himself. So he's found the right brand now.
You think so?
I do think so. Now
it's more like 1988 with the Rainbow Coalition and
Jesse
Jackson.
Mr. Jackson's problems weren't that he didn't have the white brand.
No.
I mean, the right brand. My apologies. He had the right brand. He didn't have the white brand, which is really the thing. His problem when he ran for president is that you had a Democratic Party who, just like when Bernie Sanders ran for president, was willing to do absolutely anything to stop him from being the nominee.
Wasn't that hard with that quote from 1988?
Hey, good or bad, you can say lots of good and bad about Jesse Jackson.
Oh, I'm not saying he was a bad guy. I'm just saying that he just fell apart after he attacked the Jewish voters of New York.
And yet, while he was wrong to specify Jewish people in a way that could incite those accusations of anti-Semitism, the voters he is talking about and the politicians who represent them, I'm thinking of Hakeem Jeffries and Charles Schumer, they're part of the problem. And those people are why black candidates keep accused of being anti-Semitic, because those voters are part of the big reaction against blackness in the American city right now.
Sure. And that's what I'm wondering is going to happen to Cornel by linking himself to a group that is very anti-Zionist, anti-Israel.
Charles Barron has been accused repeatedly of being anti-Semitic. The reason that he has probably lost his re-election for his city council seat is because he has been accused by the primary challenge, the main challenger, of being anti-Semitic.
I'm just wondering how that's going to spill over to Cornel West.
Cornel West is going to be accused of being anti-Semitic if he becomes enough of a target. Heck, let's remember, Bernie Sanders was accused of being anti-Semitic in 2020.
Yeah, I remember that. That was hysterical.
The group that made the anonymous account that did that was associated with the same group that had been attacking Corbyn supporters for being anti-Semites in the UK. And the only and I don't think they did their homework significantly to really understand how ridiculous calling Bernie Sanders anti-Semitic for not being pro-Israel enough was, when you consider that his whole weakness as a politician was being too pro-Israel because of his belief that labor socialism was a thing, that labor Zionism was a socialist thing.
That's true. You're absolutely right.
I really do believe that a big part of Bernie's trouble on this issue is that he can't let go of the idea that David Ben-Gurion was a socialist hero.
Really don't know what his problem is, but he's got one.
But I mean, if you think about that, if you think of it in that framing, that you just can't let go of the idea that this person was a good guy.
That's certainly going to.
That's the kind of romanticism that leads down these roads.
That is true. That is true.
And I think we ought to call this done. I realize now we've been going for 3 hours, which is great. I've been enjoying the show, but my wife's going to be mad at me.
Oh no, we can't have that.
So thanks for joining me today, Connor. As always, we found lots of rabbit holes.
Yes, we did.
I think the AI stuff really is a good place to end for my final thought. And if you have a final thought after this, please go ahead.
Sure.
But the real selling point of AI, like I was saying earlier, is that it's easier when you can just automate it and not have to worry about it. As the people making decisions see it.
Oh yeah, I agree. That's definitely it. It also breaks down it also kills labor. Let's be honest. It's a labor killing.
Well, capital endeavor will always use technology to increase labor scarcity in order to control workers. I mean, that's always going to be the thing.
Exactly. But the only thing is that AI goes after not just, the blue collar jobs. It goes after the white collar jobs, and eventually it goes after the investors.
So I'm going to go ahead and do advertising, product placement that I would never ever do, and tell people to go read a liberal book by a mainstream media journalist. I really recommend people read Extremely Online by Taylor Lorenz. I really do. Okay. Because it's about the creator economy of the early 2000s and the way that the first influencers leveraged their product against corporate interests for their own benefit and essentially got corporate interests to do their will in many ways in the end. And created this world where Twitter was a big media thing and were the reason that Elon Musk disrupting Twitter had such a huge impact on media and culture. Mm-hmm. This all feeds into each other. And what Elon Musk is doing to Twitter is in its own way anti-worker. If you see the people who create content on websites like Twitter as workers.
Sure.
And by that, I mean you and me.
That's true. He definitely wants to control the way it's distributed and how much impact you have by, forcing you to get an $8 a month blue check, which I just won't do.
But it's beyond that even. It's not even just that. It's weaponizing the site to spread the right kind of disinformation.
Sure.
Under the guise of free speech, while aggressively attacking the kind of criticism of the system that they don't want.
That's exactly. Yes, I mean,
because look at how fast Elon Musk went from anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Israel to being Bibi Netanyahu's best friend.
That is an interesting change, but maybe Bibi needs a new AI to pick out targets.
Bibi has always gotten along very well with right-wingers.
Well, that's true, but also Tesla's producing an AI software. Maybe he wants to get that contract.
Yeah, he might.
That's big business right there. All of those cloud computing software.
Who buys more shady military tech than the IDF? Only one country that I can think of.
Not too many. It's us and them.
And the shady military tech customers are the U.S. government and the IDF, and Mossad.
Yeah, well, it's what happens when you're paranoid and you have a small country that you want to maintain in a sea of enemies, as they like. But they like that. That's the
They
whole point.
made all those enemies themselves.
I know they want those enemies.
The thing you have to remember, in 1912, the most important Jewish leader in Palestine was a Syrian Sephardic Jew who was really interested in some of the things the Zionists were saying, because he really liked the idea of his rabbis and Ashkenazi rabbis getting together in Jerusalem and exchanging culture. And he wanted to see more Western rabbis move to Jerusalem and have more Western ideas in the Jewish quarter. And all of this, what you would call forward-thinking, modernizing stuff, potentially Eurocentric stuff, if you like. But he saw this as happening underneath Ottoman supervision and keeping the friendliness of the local Arab population in mind. And he changed his mind rapidly to being anti-Zionist when he started meeting people like Jabotinsky and the folks that Jabotinsky was bringing over from Poland and Russia, who were extremely right-wing and extremely nationalist in their Zionist outlook. And remember, Jabotinsky was the first guy who drew a map of Greater Israel that included Jordan as part of Greater Israel.
That's right.
This makes one unpopular with one's neighbors when you advertise that you want to conquer them.
Oh, it does. But what I was that's.
And on that note, I'm really done now. What are your final thoughts?
Well, my final thoughts are: it's been a great show. Glad to talk to you. Can't wait till we do it again. And hopefully, people will keep on reading my little essays and move on. I have a new one out about the Lamborghini by the end of the week, and hopefully everyone will get a little new knowledge. And I hope you don't think
anybody finds any media leads about how exactly the Lamborghini workers won that contract, send it our way.
That's right. I would love to see more on it. Trying to get in touch with them.
We know they won the 4-day week, but we don't know how. And that could be useful information.
It could be. So, again, thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll tweet at you.